head of a national department or national government component before at the expiry of his term or extended term, and it goes on to talk about they must perform similar functions on an equal, higher, or lower grading. Chair, you'll recall we looked at that yesterday with Mr. Maseko, and then we looked at the requirements for it, one of which is consent and the other of which is public, or alternative is public interest. But what the judgment in Apleni held was that because the appointment and career incidents is a power given to the President, the decision to place on suspension is a career incident. It is not a power that had been delegated by the President, and so when the Minister acted in the Apleni case without the President, she was found to have acted unlawfully. Section 13 of the Act, though, Chair, deals with appointment on probation. Mr. Manyi was originally appointed to the Department of Labour on probation. There's a letter to that effect. I don't expect Mr. Manyi will dispute that, but we can have his answer in a moment. I'd just like to finish the law point. You'll see Section 13 of the Act says, if so required by regulation, an executive authority shall appoint an employee on probation for such period as may be prescribed for the relevant category of employees.
I'm sorry.
Apology. We're at page 42, Chair.
No,
apologies.
You see, because of where Section 12 is on the page on which it starts, I expected 13 to be at the top of the next page.
Apologies.
But,
no, it's a lengthy 12,
so
and then it's interspersed with a 12 capital A.
Okay,
and now we're down at the bottom of page 42.
Yeah, okay,
Apologies. So what that section deals with is now appointment on probation. It says, if so required by regulation, an executive authority shall appoint an employee on probation for such period as may be prescribed for the relevant category of employees. And at 2, after the completion of a probationary period contemplated in subsection 1, an executive authority shall confirm the probationary period if the employee concerned has, and then there are 2 requirements, performed satisfactorily and complied with all the conditions to which his or her appointment was subject. Chair, the executive authority referred to in that section is the Minister, not the President. That's also confirmed in the Apleni judgment, albeit not referencing 13, but referencing the reference to executive authority in the Act. That means, Chair, the sum total of my legal submissions is that the decision to place Mr. Manyi on probation, to determine whether to confirm the probation and keep him in the employment of the Department of Labour or not, is a decision that is given under the Public Service Act to the Minister and not the President. In that respect, it is different to the powers exercised under Section 12. It is distinguishable from the Apleni judgment. And I make those submissions simply so that we don't need to continue with an asserted legal debate by Mr. Manyi about the patent unlawfulness of a decision by Minister Mdladlana not to confirm his probation, which is what he did in the letter of the 29th of October 2010. There's no use in my view, subject to your direction, Chair, having a legal debate with Mr. Manyi, but the course of the evidence, I submit, should not take course on the assumed common cause basis that there was something unlawful in what Minister Mdladlana did.
Well, you didn't refer to subsection 3 of section 13. It seems to me that you should also have referred to it. Do you want to?
Oh, indeed. Apologies, Chair. I did omit it. 3 says, if the probationary appointment is not confirmed in terms of subsection 2, the executive authority may extend the period of probation or dismiss the employee in accordance with the Labour Relations Act. Yes, Chair, I was about to complete my submissions, probably without referring to the most important subsections. Yes. So I do apologise for that.
Okay.
The nub of the point, though, Chair, is that the legal terrain, as identified in this Act and as we read it, does not make it the case that a decision on probation, whether to confirm, extend it, or on not extending it, dismiss an employee, is a decision that lies only with the President. But then if we can just return to the facts to which Mr. Manyi can speak.
Can I respond to this quickly, Chair?
Yes, if you wish to.
Yeah, first point I want to make is that Advocate Hofmeyr has just misguided herself on her articulations. Both her and former Minister Mdladla are both incorrect. In this same Public Service Act that just given us, Chair, this is why it's important to read this thing properly. This is the talk about appointment on probation, and it says if so required, we're talking about of an employee. Now, what you should have then done is to go to page 30 of the same bundle, same everything, on page 30, and look at the definition of an employee and know who is it that we're talking about. When you say an employee, and I'm going to read it here, Chair, for the record, an employee means a person contemplated in Section 8, but excludes a person appointed in terms of Section 12A. Now, 12A is heads of departments, which is what the Apleni thing is about, which is what we're about. I was a head of department. And this thing here talks to employees, not head of departments. This is very clear. So both former Minister Mdladla and Advocate Hofmeyr have just not understood Public Service Act. Her interpretation is totally wrong. Totally wrong.
Ms. Hofmeyr, of course, this is a debate that can happen later, but
indeed, Chair. Mr. Manyi refers to 12 capital A. That is not Section 12 in terms of which the appointment of heads of department take place. It's the appointment of persons on grounds of policy considerations insofar as executive authorities as cabinet may determine to appoint one or more persons under a contract, whether full-time or part-time capacity. It is on that basis that we submit it is not excluded by the definition that appointments under Section 12 would include employees. But Chair, it's not, I agree, a useful place for Mr. Manyi and I to debate the law. Our submission is that the employees under Section 13 is broad enough to include those appointed under Section 12, albeit that the reference is to Section 8 employees. It doesn't exclude, as it does under Section 12A, other employees. And so an interpretation consistent with the Act must be given. But Chairperson, my proposal at this point is not to detain us with the law further. We can make those submissions in due course, and no doubt Mr. Manyi will have an opportunity to do so. The factual point of the matter is the following. I understand Mr. Manyi's answers to be... apologies.
Before that, when I say, Mr. Manyi, that the legal issues can be dealt with later, I don't mean you may not, when you give your answers, refer to what you understood to be the legal position or what you understand to be the legal position, which informed your which informs whatever you say, or which may have informed whatever decisions you may have taken. So I'm not preventing you from articulating those.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
If we then return to the factual position, Mr. Manyi, we were dealing with the reference you made at page 293 of Exhibit NN5 to the fact that the minister had fired you. And I understood your answer to be an unlawful firing is no firing at all. Is that a fair summary?
That's correct.
As a matter of fact, do you accept that you were fired, irrespective of whether that was a legally valid or invalid decision?
That's your importation.
I beg your pardon?
That is your understanding, and it's your opinion. I note your opinion.
No, I was asking for your understanding. I want to separate the question of whether the decision was lawful or unlawful. Again, Chair, I don't want to get into a legal debate, but decisions taken pursuant to exercises of public power, particularly under legislation, exist in fact and may indeed be valid and binding until set aside by a court. So it's not my intention to get into that debate with Mr. Manyi. I want to understand what Mr. Manyi understood the factual position to be. And the question is...
I'm sorry, maybe let's put the question a little differently. Do you accept that Minister Mdladlana made a decision? I think I'm going to use what your wording, made a decision to fire you. Irrespective of what you think of that from his side, do you accept that he made such a decision? Or do you say, no, he made no such decision? And I leave room for the fact that you might say, I don't recognize that decision as valid legally. But as far as he's concerned, is your understanding that as far as he's concerned, he made a decision to fire you?
Yes, Chair. I think I can even back that up because even the recommendation that he makes, because he thought that he's got a final say on the matter. On his letter, he says, if I'm not happy with his decision, I must take the matter up with the Public Service Bargaining Council. Yes, which is an outside body. Okay. So in his mind, incorrectly so, he thought he had me fired.
Okay.
And Mr. Manyi, you knew then at the end of October 2010 that he had taken a decision to fire you?
Not to confirm the probation. That's what I know.
Despite your evidence previously that you did not have any knowledge?
I never said I never had any knowledge. I said I never saw the letter.
Mr. Manyi, if we can then go, Chair, at this point I'd like to go to the question of Mr. Manyi's salary and its payment. For that purpose, we'd like to see the documents that Mr. Manyi has brought. We're just before the tea break. May I suggest that we take a slightly earlier adjournment so that we can look at those documents?
We can do that, but I just need to say, certainly from my point, it's important that as we deal with the question of Mr. Manyi's non-confirmation of, or the non-confirmation of his probation, or the dismissal and the transfer, it's important that we deal with it in a manner that links it to what is relevant for purposes of seeing whether it throws light on why Mr. Maseko was transferred. Certainly for me, that's what I'm looking for, whether anything connected with the withdrawal of his dismissal and his transfer, whether there's anything that can help me understand the reasons of Mr. Maseko's transfer from GCI to DPSA, and maybe even who made the decision who initiated Mr. Maseko's transfer. I know that part of what he has been asked to deal with in an affidavit also relates to Ms. Pumla Williams' evidence. I'm not saying that that's irrelevant, that may probably will be relevant. I'm just saying insofar as it relates to Mr. Maseko, for me that's what I'm looking for. And it may well be that, however unfair or however unlawful the dismissal may have been, or the failure to confirm the probation may have been, or however lawful or fair it was, or valid it was, that might not throw light on what I'm looking for. So in other words, as far as I'm concerned, the only reason leaving out the issues relating to Ms. Williams' evidence, the only other basis that I'm interested in Mr. Manyi's transfer and dismissal and withdrawal of dismissal is to see whether it might help me understand how or who initiated the transfer of Mr. Maseko. Otherwise, it's not something that I'm particularly interested in, his dismissal and transfer, if it doesn't help me on that issue.
Chair, we're indebted for the direction. If I may just make one or two submissions.
Yes, yes.
It was certainly not my intention in the course of the evidence to place significance on the lawfulness or otherwise of that decision. Mr. Manyi, however, repeatedly in his evidence has sought to distance himself from accepting that a decision to fire him was taken with reference to its legal validity or not. And it was against that backdrop that I thought it important to traverse to some extent the legislative provisions. But Chairperson, we are well aware of your particular interest. And if I may then just clarify, the reason why we have spent any time on the dismissal at all, the non-confirmation of the probation, is because it's very important for this commission, in my submission, to understand Mr. Manyi's state of mind when he started to interact with people like Minister Baloyi and Minister Oliphant in the lead up to the decision to withdraw that termination. And that has been the basis for the questions this morning. It's taken some time to get clarity from Mr. Manyi as to what his understanding of his position in the Department of Labour was when he was meeting with Minister Shabani, for example, a few days before he was moved. Because what I would like to ask Mr. Manyi in due course is, how can you have a conversation with Minister Shabani about being transferred to GCIS at a point in time where you understand a decision has been taken to fire you? And it's in that context that we probe those aspects, because then, Chair, our hope is that through this process we will get greater clarity about what happened in those 7 days.
Yes. No, that's fine. I just wanted to highlight where my thinking is. But also so as long as I think the focus remains in terms of what we are trying to do, where it's supposed to throw light, whether it throws light or not, because the intention is not to go into a lot of other details, but I understand where you are. Mr. Manyi, you wanted to say something?
Chair, I just want to close by saying, on this matter, I maintain my point that even this section here, the employee referred to here is people other than heads of departments, as it were. Even the termination of a head of department, even the probation of the head of department, if we are not going to do it, which has the effect of dismissal, if we're not doing it, must get the confirmation of the president. Even at that point, the minister does not have authority on his own. So that's the point. And in conclusion, I've been consistent that from where I was sitting, yesterday she made me look into the other page here where I had said I was put in precautionary suspension once, precautionary suspension twice, and special leave. She read that page because that information was in a letter, which was not in an affidavit. And she wanted me to state it here on record under oath. And I stated it on record under oath, that is my position, and that position does not change. And this morning, again, I read the DG's letter where I know that in here there's a CFO who is saying something contrary to what the DG is saying, but here's the DG, the head of department, who did not just say this because it's a DG, he even submitted the financial, the past statement just to show that what he's saying is just not from his head. It's information that is based on credible information. So to answer the question that she wants to ask and that she's alluding to.
Let her ask it later, and then you can deal with it.
Okay.
Is that right? Yeah.
Okay.
She's still going to ask it. When she asks, then you deal with it.
Okay, Chair.
Okay,
Chair,
all
if
right.
we may just discuss logistics for a moment,
Yeah.
because I understand from the Secretariat that travel arrangements have been made for Mr. Manyi this afternoon, and they need to be able to move that flight imminently if it needs to be moved. I understand the arrangements to be that his flight is at 2 o'clock, which would mean he would need to leave here at 12. And I have no confidence that we would finish by 12. I think that we would go somewhat beyond that, not excessively beyond that.
Maybe 12:30?
Indeed, something of that order, Chair.
Yes.
It really does depend on the length of the answers and the engagement. And of course, Chair, you must have a full opportunity to ask your questions.
Yeah.
But I think it would be prudent to seek to move the flight
Yes.
now.
Mr. Manyi, what's your view about
No, Chair,
that?
if we finish 12:30, I'll still get it.
You'd still get it?
Yeah, of course,
Yes.
I've got other arrangements in
Other
Cape Town.
arrangements, yes. Okay, so maybe then let's take the chair adjournment, resume at 12:30, and then let's go full swing after that and see how. If close to 12:30 there's a difficulty, let's talk about it then.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, we adjourn. Yes, Ms. Hofmeyer.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to move, if we may, back to the lawyer's letter of the 3rd of November 2010. That is its Exhibit NN5 at page 297.
Yes. Yes.
Mr. Manyi, this letter was addressed to former Minister Oliphant and former Minister Beloy. Is that correct? 297.
Please switch on your mic, Mr. Manyi.
Can you repeat your question, please?
Of course. I was just confirming that this was a letter written by your attorneys to the then Minister Oliphant and Minister Beloy. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct, Chair.
And it's dated the 3rd of November 2010. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chair.
The Minister of Labour is now Ms. Oliphant. Is that right?
That's correct, Chair.
Do you know when Minister Mdladlana ceased being the Minister of Labour?
Okay, in fact, I think I do. It can only be on the, I beg your pardon, I think 2 dates, Chair, one of the 2 dates, either on the 29th or on the 30th. In fact, if you look at Minister Oliphant's affidavit, when she talks about the 30th, she talks about the 30th in the morning of the 30th. So generally how it works is that you never appoint a person without creating a vacancy. So Minister Mdladlana would have been removed either on the 30th earlier in the morning or the 29th, as it were. So around that space.
So a matter of days before this letter was written, correct?
On the, yeah.
Sorry, you've just been talking about the 30th and without a reference to the month. So I understand you to be meaning the 29th or the 30th of October 2010, which is a few days before this letter, correct?
In fact, Chair, apologies, Ms. Hoffman, for a long answer. I think it's important, this issue of dates, just to see the malice actually in this whole thing. On the 28th of October, there's a DC sitting on the 28th of October. In the middle of this thing, as I was saying, within 30 minutes or so on the 20th of October, then there's this major announcement that gets made in the meeting that the minister has decided not to confirm the probation, and the lawyers, they make a decision that there's no point carrying on any further with this now because the objective is going to be achieved differently, which just shows that even that DC had a predetermined outcome. But now that the predetermined outcome has already been, there's a quicker way to achieve it via no termination. There's no point in doing this one. Now, this is the 28th when this comes. I'm sure because Chairperson, maybe something would have leaked to the minister because this is a decision that to the deployment committee of the ANC is about 5 or 6 people that are in that committee. Now, if on the 30th, Minister Oliphant is on record to having been told on the 30th, so somewhere between the 28th and the 30th, something would have leaked to the minister that you are a goner, as it were. And this is why he then hurriedly wrote that letter on the whatever, but dated on the 29th and so on. So, yeah, so.
Well, I think based on evidence from other witnesses that I've heard, my suspicion is that probably Mr. Mdladlana was one of a number of ministers who were dropped from cabinet at the end of October 2010,
Indeed, Chair.
one of whom was Ms. Barbara Hogan, who gave evidence in this commission.
The press announcement was done on the 31st of October, Chair.
Yes,
It's public
yes,
record.
yes.
But the decision makers
Yes.
would have sort of made up
the
their minds
decision
before that. So he would have got wind of what is coming. So I want to place it here, Chair, that the letter that we're busy splitting hairs on was actually even done on malice. This is why that he didn't follow any process to achieve his ill objectives.
Mr. Manyi, what interactions did you have with Minister Oliphant after she took office?
In Minister Oliphant's affidavit, Chair, she makes reference to this question. Whatever is in there, I confirm it.
Mr. Manyi, we'd like to be assisted by your evidence, if we may, as opposed to, are you saying what she says there you confirm as being accurate?
Yes.
Okay, because your letter, your lawyer's letter seems to say something a bit different. So if we could go there. The lawyer's letter at 297 was written on the 3rd of November, right? And at page 301, at paragraph 7.1, they record there that Mr. Manyi has advised us that he met with the new Minister of Labour and they had a cordial interaction, and Mr. Manyi is excited at the prospect of working under the guidance and instructions of Minister Oliphant. Now, I'd like your help on that because Minister Oliphant says she met with you the week after she was appointed on the 1st of November. But this letter seems to record that you met with her prior to the 3rd of November. Is that correct?
Yeah. Okay, Chair, let me just get the dates right here. This happened more than 10 years or so ago, about 10 years ago. So does Minister Oliphant in her affidavit make reference to the actual date that we met?
Yes, she goes through the chronology of the week in which she was appointed, and she talks about the first meeting with you having been after that week. And so I'm just trying to get clarity now. Again, she may have got the dates wrong, but I want your evidence. Can you confirm that you met with her before the 3rd of November?
Hey, I don't know where this... I can't recall, Chair, but I recall vividly the meeting at Sheraton. This is where we discussed, like she said, the Sheraton meeting I really recall.
Yes.
But any other discussion prior to that?
Yes.
You don't recall. The Sheraton meeting is the second one that Ms. Oliphant refers to. Maybe just help me with one other thing. If you had met prior to the 3rd of November, it would likely, on Ms. Oliphant's version, have had to have been on the 1st of November itself, the day she flew up to be appointed in the position, and she flew back down to KZN, because her evidence is for the remainder of that week she was in KwaZulu-Natal. Do you have any recollection of meeting her at the airport when she came up on the 1st?
Oh, yes. Okay. Oh, okay. All right. Okay. I remember that.
Doesn't come back.
Yeah.
Super.
I remember that, Chair. Yeah. It's just that when you say meeting, one gets a formal setting. But yes, I did go and meet. I met her at the airport. Yeah. We went to the airport and yeah.
And what was the subject matter of your meeting?
Well, look, she I think at that point we were just walking. It's just like meeting. She just got off the plane and all that.
Did you bump into each other, or there was...
I knew that she was going to be around the airport. I knew this.
and you wanted to see her?
I wanted to seize the opportunity.
Okay.
Yeah, I had the agenda. I wanted to seize the opportunity. And then, obviously, she was non-committal, but she was not hostile, and so on. So the excitement I would have expressed here would have been the sentiment that I got out of that.
How did you know when she would be at the airport?
I don't know how I would have known, but I knew. I just don't know how. I don't remember how. But clearly, on the, yeah, but look, I work for
Wouldn't
public
have
service.
flight arrangements have been made by your department and maybe... wouldn't
No,
you have
I was at
checked
the
with them?
Department of Labor, but
Chair, at that point, Mr. Manyi was not at the Department of Labour.
yeah, but
Yes,
because
Chairperson, I'm part of society. I've got networks, so it got to me. I've got networks.
Okay.
Sorry, so it was the networks that gave you the details of when her flight was
Yes.
arriving?
Yes, the networks. Not the flight was arriving, but we knew that on this day that was going to happen. And so on. A lot of other ministers were coming. So maybe somebody else had another agenda, says, hey, come. I just don't have the details, but it was not a big deal, which I just knew somehow.
So did you have to wait long for her to arrive?
I don't remember now how long I waited.
And what was your purpose in meeting her at the airport when she came up?
It's just to, first of all, to create a relationship with her, just to show that I really want to get back to work. Because at that time, I had been at home for a long time, getting paid, and so on. So it's always been my problem that here is government money being paid to somebody sitting at home. So here's an opportunity, let's get a fresh start. So I wanted to start a fresh start.
The lawyer's letter indicates that at the same page, 301, that you suggested on the 3rd of November through your lawyers that she consider withdrawing the letter of the 29th of October 2010 and reinstating you as the Director General of the Department of Labour with immediate effect. Is that what you discussed with her?
I'll be lying to you, Chair. Even last night, because I got 5 bundles to go through. I didn't read this letter and make some recollection. I honestly don't remember the details. I just remember the sentiment of why I met her. But the nitty-gritty, full stop and commas, I don't remember.
Is it fair, though, on the basis of what's recorded in the letter, that you recognize the need for the termination letter to be withdrawn?
No. What I knew is that I was on precautionary suspension, and you have to get reinstated from suspension. So if I had said that, it would be in line with my agenda. So my understanding of being suspended is that you can't just now decide for yourself that you're just going to go back. Somebody must authorize your coming back from suspension. So to reinstate from suspension is another reinstatement from precautionary suspension.
Mr. Manyi, you've previously confirmed today that you do accept that Mr. Mdladlana took a decision to fire you. I suggest that that appreciation is consistent with the understanding that's reflected in the letter, which is that that position had to be reversed by someone. Do you accept that?
No, I don't accept that. What I had said earlier, Chair, when the Chair gave a good formulation, is to accept the formulation of the Chair, that was what is in Mr. Mdladlana's head, not that I ever accepted the truth of it or the factual basis of it, etc. of it. I never accepted that.
Mr. Manyi, I don't want to have to belabor points unnecessarily. Is it not your evidence that you understood that Minister Mdladlana had taken a decision to fire you?
I repeat, Chair, Mr. Mdladlana has got no authority to fire me. He might have had, that formulation, back to formulation, Chair, we're going to go around in circles here.
I think your answer, based on what you said when I made that formulation, your answer would be that you accepted that Mr. Mdladlana had made a decision to fire you, but from your point of view, you didn't recognize, as I understand it, recognize him as having power to fire you.
Yes,
Is
Chair.
that right?
Yes, Chair. And we must separate that from saying because I know his agenda, and therefore I accept his agenda. I do not accept his agenda. His agenda is to fire me. I accept that. I accept that from where he sits, he's firing me. But I don't accept that that is a factual position.
Do you accept that something had to be done to bring you back into the Department of Labour?
I was on precautionary suspension. So to go from precautionary suspension back, yes, something must happen.
So when Minister Oliphant withdrew your termination and placed you on special leave, did she not do something that was competent?
No, she regularized something that was
I'm sorry.
irregular.
I'm not sure, Ms. Hofmeyer, whether you shouldn't try and find another more layperson-friendly
Legal
term than
neutral, I
competent,
suspect, indeed.
because
Certainly,
that
Chair.
might be very legal.
Certainly.
But, so I just want to make sure that Mr. Manyi understands whatever the question is
Of
that
course,
you want
Chair.
to put to him. It may be that you might struggle to find another term, I don't know, but I just want to make sure that he will understand your question.
When you were engaging, I'll get there in a moment if I may, Chair. I'll go back a bit in terms of the discussions with Ms. Oliphant. So you've confirmed that there was the engagement at the airport on the 1st of November. I understand you to also have confirmed the meeting at the Sheraton. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
What was the subject matter of that meeting?
Yeah, at the Sheraton, I went there to discuss my situation at the Sheraton, which colloquially is described as dismissal, and so on, that this is unlawful, etc., and all of that. So we discussed that in there to say, this is unlawful, and can she please, because my biggest problem, Chair, to be honest, my biggest problem is that I knew that I would win this case in court. And my biggest problem was that at that time we were driving transformation very hard. Now, can you imagine a minister of labor losing a labor matter in court? How else can government govern going forward on labor issues? So that was my predicament, Chairperson. So yeah, I continue to insist that that was an unlawful thing.
Did you discuss appealing the decision with her?
The what, sorry?
Did you discuss appealing Minister Mdladlana's decision with her?
2010, I don't remember, but look, Chair, I can't pretend that I have not read her affidavit.
Yes.
I would be lying.
Yes.
In her affidavit, she says she advised me to appeal. So to appeal to DPSA. You see, I think it's important also, Chair, to draw the distinction, and we must understand the point of departure. If one minister says, go to DPSA, that is an internal process. That minister understands the law, understands that this thing is still within us in government. But if another minister who is misguided is saying, go to the bargaining council, which is outside, that person is already thinking that his decision is final. So Minister Oliphant knew that the president works through the DPSA minister and all of that. So redetermination must include the DPSA minister with the president. So that's why she advised me like that.
Well, Minister Oliphant's version on her affidavit is that you'll find this, Mr. Manyi, in the bundle NN3 in the same file. It's under the same tab. It's under tab 3 in the file at page 4. You can have it in front of you, but I am intending to read it, so you can also give me your answer in relation to it. When Ms. Oliphant indicates the first interaction she had with you, she says, I then received a call from Minister Manyi, who congratulated me on my appointment and informed me that he was intending to appeal the decision to dismiss him or take the Department of Labour to court over his dismissal. She suggests that in that paragraph, it was you who informed her, not that she advised you to appeal. Do you say that what she's reflected there is wrong?
I was not following you when you were reading.
Apologies. Under tab 3 at page 4. Mr. Manyi, it's at paragraph 11.
Yes,
paragraph 11 at that page. It's sort of a third of the way down. She's talking about the week after her appointment, and then she says a third of the way down, I then received a call from Mr. Manyi, who congratulated me on my appointment and informed me that he was intending to appeal the decision to dismiss him or take the Department of Labour to court over his dismissal. And what I wanted to understand from you is, in your evidence a moment ago, you said in the interaction with her, she had proposed appealing. Here, she seems to indicate it came from you. Do you dispute what she says there?
No, I don't, because what it means in substance is that I'm not going to fold my arms. So you could put a strong legal jargon of what appeal means and so on, but strictly speaking, the long and the short of this was that I'm not going to just accept this and fold my arms. So I will take it up somehow. So this is correct.
And in those interactions with Minister Oliphant, did she indicate to you that she did not want you to return to the Department of Labour?
I don't remember that discussion.
You've seen her affidavit in which she indicates that she did not want you to return to the Department of Labour. Is that correct? But you don't recall her conveying that to you at all?
No.
So there were no discussions about how you could be brought back into the department if it was a situation in which she didn't want you there as the Director General?
No, I don't remember any of that.
You also had interactions with Minister Beloy in this period.
Oh, yeah. Numerous
Is that
times.
correct?
Yeah, numerous times.
Did you have any interactions with former President Zuma about your position?
I probably would have written to the president, highlighting issues and seeking his intervention. Yeah.
Mr. Manyi, that's certainly borne out to some extent by one of the documents that we received from DPSA, and I'd like to just take you to it if I may.
He was my employer after all, so I had to talk to my employer.
Indeed. Of course, your contract of employment is not concluded with the president, is it?
But it's his authority. He works with the DPSA, it's his authority. They work under his authority.
Mr. Manyi, if you go in Exhibit NN5 to page 208,
Yep.
have you ever seen this document? It's a 3-page document which unfortunately omits every alternate page. Have you seen this document before?
Have I seen it before? No, I saw it last night with part of these things that you gave me last night.
Thank you, Mr. Manyi. Chair, just to explain the situation with these documents, there have been efforts on the part of the Commission since January of this year to obtain the disciplinary file of Mr. Manyi. And as matters currently stand, it has never been found in any of the departments who have been approached. What was found by DPSA was a set of documents in a legal file within the department, and those are the documents that we are working with at the moment. It was important when one first sees these pages to establish whether there's just a photocopying error, that there were double-sided pages that then weren't photocopied. The affidavit of DPSA indicates that this is the file in its totality that was found and has been given to the Commission. I understand from Mr. Manyi that he does not know of this document. It's a document at page 210, which appears to have been authored or intended to be signed by Mr. Baloyi, and so it's a matter that we will pick up with Mr. Baloyi on. But what I am interested in is what is recorded in the first paragraph in order to ask Mr. Manyi about it. Because at paragraph 1.1 on page 208, Mr. Manyi, the following is recorded. The Office of the President of the Republic of South Africa asked me to intervene in the matter involving the former Director General of the Department of Labour, Mr. Mr. Manyi. The issue in this case is that the former Minister of Labour, the former minister, decided not to confirm Mr. Manyi's permanent appointment as Director General following his probation, effectively terminating his services on 30 November 2010. Were you aware that the Office of the President had made an approach to Minister Baloyi to intervene in this matter?
No.
No. But you do confirm that you raised the issue with former President Zuma?
Yes, there's nobody I didn't raise it with. I raised it with everyone.
Right. And then I'd like to take you to a further letter in the same bundle at page 216. Mr. Manyi, this appears to be a letter between, if you go over the page to 217, Mr. Baloyi, and back at the first page, Ms. Olifant. Have you seen this letter before?
No.
Thank you. I certainly intend to probe it with Mr. Baloyi when he comes to give evidence, Chair, but what I'm interested in, Mr. Manyi, is what he records at paragraph 3 on page 217, because it is relevant to us understanding what Minister Olifant was thinking about and your engagements with her insofar as bringing you back into the Department of Labour is concerned. You'll see at paragraph 3 there, Mr. Baloyi records the following. He says, in light of my observations in paragraph 2 above, and just for completeness, he concludes in that former paragraph that Minister Mdladlana did not have the requisite authority when he terminated your services. He says to Minister Olifant, you're advised to A, withdraw the former minister's letter, which terminated the DG's services, B, extend the DG's probation for another 4 months, C, place him on 2 weeks special leave to allow us space to find a suitable solution to this matter, and D, during this 2-week period, decide whether or not to pursue the misconduct charges against the DG. Do you see that?
Yes.
Mr. Manyi, did you ever discuss the misconduct charges against you with Minister Olifant?
I think on the meeting at Sheraton, Chairperson, if I remember, because I wanted her to have information, I would have gone to her with a list of these allegations to say this is what I'm being accused of, and this is my response to these accusations. Yeah, so accusations, charges, indeed, are discussed with her.
Now, are you aware that she withdrew the termination of your employment as DG on the 31st of January 2011?
Yeah, I saw that in the affidavit.
Did you ever receive the letter in terms of which she made that decision?
I've seen the letter here, Chair. You know, if you look at the addresses of these letters, they are all private bags, and they've been sent, I think, to the department. So I actually never saw these letters. They are there's another one again, and so on, but I have never received any letter from anyone for that matter. The only letter I received was probably because I was in the department itself, was the GCIS, but all these other ones, not that I didn't know about the contents of them in the fullness of time, but I never received the actual physical copy of the letter.
When did you know of the contents of this letter?
You mean the letter of withdrawal?
Of withdrawal, indeed, Chair.
Yes. Maybe we must just indicate, if I recall correctly, that letter is addressed to Mr. Manyi, is that right?
That's right. If we
Yes.
could just get it up, Chair,
Yeah.
so we can all be looking at it. You'll find it in NN5 at... If you'll give me a moment, at page 41, 41. That's Exhibit NN5,
Yeah, so
page
I can't
41.
recall exactly. I really can't recall exactly when I knew about it.
Okay,
Yes,
so
I just wanted to follow up on the issue of the address. So was the point you were making, Mr. Manyi, was that that letter, and maybe another one that you have in mind, the address used was a Department of Labor address.
Yes, Chair.
And because you were not at the Department of Labor, you were on suspension or
Yeah.
you had been dismissed, whatever the position is, that is not the address that should have been used if the letter
Yes, Chair.
was to reach you.
Yes, Chair.
Oh, okay.
Minister Oliphant, former Minister Oliphant in her affidavit says it was your responsibility to submit this letter to the Human Resources Department. Did she have any interactions with you about that?
Yeah, I don't remember, but I can say this for a fact, Chair, that I've never had any formal engagement with the HR of the Department of Labor since this matter was brewing.
So you said a moment ago that in the fullness of time you came to learn of the contents of the letter. I might have missed your answer to that. When did you come in the fullness of time to learn of the contents of this letter?
I said I didn't recall that.
You didn't recall. Could you give us an order of magnitude? I'm certainly not asking for a day, but do you think you learned about it in February 2011, beyond that?
No, I think I really don't want to be put under pressure
Sure.
and say the wrong things I don't recall.
No, that's absolutely fair. Mr. Manyi, then, when you were meeting with Minister Shabani, either on the preceding Thursday or Friday or Monday of the week of the 2nd of February, you didn't know that you had been brought back into the Department of Labor, did you?
Definitely, no, I did not know.
So,
I just thought I was still on precautionary suspension.
Mr. Manyi, your letters in November make it absolutely clear you knew that you had been fired.
No, Chair, we're going to go around in tails. I know that that was the intention of the minister, but I knew that it could not be put into effect. And I said, in December, I got the salary, and I did give the bank statement for December salary. So I've got concrete evidence. If anybody says to me in December we were fired, I say, how's that? Why have I got a transaction from payroll in December if I was fired as of end of November?
Mr. Manyi, your own words in November of 2010 were that you had been fired. It is the evidence of Ms. Oliphant that you engaged her on the basis that you were appealing the decision to dismiss you.
Yeah, but Chair, I did explain that those terms have just been used colloquially, that the issue
Yes.
of being fired
Yes.
does not happen without the involvement of the president. I've been saying this repeatedly.
Yes, I think you have, what you certainly have said you knew was that the minister had taken a decision to fire you.
Yes.
That you said you knew. The other part that you have said we know, namely you didn't recognize that, you didn't think he had that power. But that he had made a decision that you knew, you didn't think he had that power, that much, I think we are clear.
Yes, and not only
From your
that,
side, yeah.
not only that, I continued to get the salary. So
Yeah.
whatever was purported to have been a dismissal from where I was sitting didn't really happen. Because how can it be if I get a salary?
Okay, Ms. Hoffmeyer.
Chair, the matter of the salary, Mr. Manyi is indeed correct. He did hand us the his bank records for the period of the December payment. It requires further investigation on the part of the Commission, and I propose just to highlight why that is so. Mr. Manyi indicated that there was an affidavit from the Director General of the Department of Labour confirming that he had been paid a salary for the months of November, December and January. That is indeed so. He took us to that affidavit. That affidavit is accompanied by a further affidavit. If I can just give you the reference. Chair, it's the affidavit of Mr. Maduna. You'll find it at page 147 of NN5.
Yes.
Mr. Maduna's affidavit to the Commission followed the affidavit of the DG, because the DG said at paragraph 10 that Mr. Manyi took us to, that from the information brought to my attention from the Persal or BAS indicates salary payments were made to Mr. Manyi for November 2010, December 2010 and January 2011. So there's no dispute that he was paid for those months. But what became relevant is when he was paid for those months. And that was sought to be clarified in the affidavit of Mr. Maduna, because you'll see there at paragraph 5 on that page, it is recorded from the information brought to my attention, it is indicated that, apologies, I must start a paragraph above. 4. From the information brought to my attention, it's indicated that when Mr. Manyi's termination was withdrawn on 31 January 2011, this required him to be back paid for the amounts not paid to him in December 2010 and January 2011. From the information brought to my attention, it is indicated that this is the reason why there was an instruction to pay Mr. Manyi's 2 skipped months of salary. From the information brought to my attention, it's indicated that thereafter, the salaries for December 2010 and January 2011 were paid to Mr. Manyi through BAS on 7 February 2011. And then there are accompanying documents, including a document date with a handwritten date, the 7th of February. Chair, I don't want to take this any further at this point, except to indicate, because it was one of the grounds on which Mr. Manyi indicated that I was operating in bad faith. It's important to look at both affidavits, it's my submission, but I am concerned to have received from Mr. Manyi bank statements reflecting a payment. I don't propose to go further. I'd like to investigate it so that we can get to the bottom of what is stated here as against the bank statements of Mr. Manyi. But that was just to complete that aspect. I'd like to go back, if I may, to the meeting with Minister Shabani. So at that point, you've confirmed for the chair you knew... Apologies.
I mentioned, for what it's worth, that we are on my watch at about 9.5 minutes past 12. I simply mentioned that because we were looking at trying to finish at 12:30, so that we are all alive as to how much time is left. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. I'm well aware of the time left. My concern is whether we will complete in that time. But should we possibly get to 12:30 and then make a decision about taking matters forward?
If you think there is a chance you could finish by 12, let's do that. But if you already know it can't, then maybe we should talk now. But I think give it a try.
Yeah, I'm happy to give it a try. I'm almost certain, though, that we won't finish. And the reason for that is I'm very mindful of the focus that the chair wanted to place on the remaining evidence. The challenge, though, is that we need to complete the transfer into GCIS. There's evidence related to that and what Mr. Manyi knew and who he was interacting with. I then do need, I know that there's a full affidavit from Mr. Manyi in response to Ms. Williams, but there are particular points in in that affidavit that are relevant to the issues we've been traversing with Mr. Manyi today, and let me just highlight what they are.
Yes, yes.
Mr. Manyi made submissions, gave evidence yesterday in relation to the spend of GCIS after Mr. Manyi entered GCIS, and he made the point that there was never 600 million rand paid while he was at GCIS to TNA. It's important that we probe precisely what payments were made in the period under Mr. Manyi's watch, quite frankly, in fairness to Mr. Manyi, because he says that we must look at that in order for dots to be connected in a particular way, and it would not be appropriate not to traverse that with Mr. Manyi. If I'm to do those aspects and also, well, we want to tie up the salary aspect. It's certainly not clear to me that we'd finish by 12:30.
Well, if the reality is that we are not going to finish by 12:30 when Mr. Manyi may have to leave, because as I understand it, he has got other commitments that he needs to attend to. I think that's what he said, to say why it's important for him to catch the flight. Then the question that arises is whether, if he is going to be asked to come back anyway, there is any point in delaying him another 15 minutes, or we should let him go and catch his flight and other arrangements be made for the future. Mr. Manyi, do you want to say something on this?
Chairperson, I don't know.
I would like to finish if you can.
I'd like to finish if I can,
Yes, I
Chair.
think that's
Yeah.
the sense I'm getting.
Yeah.
Well, I think from our side, we are available the whole day. Certainly from my side, I was sensitive if you might have commitments that you can't move, that you needed to honor. But if there is a chance that maybe even if we take a break, you make whatever calls that you might wish to make and make other arrangements, and we're able to continue and try and finish, we are available to do that. But I know that Ms. Hofmeyer has said there are things that might need further investigation. So I don't know whether we could achieve finishing with you completely altogether today, or whether whatever other issues that may be investigated might be dealt with by way of affidavit, responses in affidavit, without you having to come back and give oral evidence. So all of those things could be looked at. What do you think?
Chair, if the people doing logistics, they can move, let's say, the flight by 1 hour, will that work for Ms. Hofmeyer?
The challenge is we usually take the lunch adjournment. So my suggestion would be that we push the flight late enough that we can happily adjourn, come back at 2 and complete the evidence. I'm just anxious with a gap of an hour that we would be able to make 3.
Well,
Can't we take lunch at 2, Chair? So that we finish at 2?
We can move the lunch to later if that's going to help. So
Certainly.
nobody will die if we don't eat at 1. So okay, and if we do it that way, namely we work up to 2, would that give you enough time to?
That should give enough time, subject to the investigations on the salary issue. But as I stand here now, Chair, it does seem to me it might be the appropriate subject matter for an exchange of affidavits. We would have to evaluate the affidavits when we receive them, as we always do, in order to determine whether it's necessary to probe further through oral evidence. But as I stand here now, it does seem to be the type of matter that could be addressed on affidavit.
Yes. Okay. I think let's work on the basis, therefore. I think, is there somebody who will talk to those who do logistics to try and move Mr. Manyi's flight?
To 4 o'clock.
To 4 o'clock.
We'll make arrangements, Chair.
If he doesn't get a 4 o'clock one, the earliest after that, is that fine?
Yeah, that's fine, Chair.
Yeah, okay, all right.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Manyi.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Yes, let's proceed then.
Thank you, Chair. We were dealing with your interaction with Minister Shabani when he made the proposal to you of options, and I was probing with you whether you raised at all the question of you not at that point being within the Department of Labour. Did I understand your evidence to be you had no discussion about that?
Not at all, Chair.
So you didn't query with him how you could be transferred to another department, despite the fact that there had been a previous decision by Minister Mdladlana to dismiss you?
No, I'd never recognized that decision. I understood myself to be on precautionary suspension, and I repeat, because I was getting my salary. So I understood myself to be in precautionary suspension. So and I knew that on the 28th, the charges that, allegations that were preferred against me were abandoned, basically, because Minister Mdladlana thought she's got a shortcut to deal with this matter. So I knew that the only most logical thing is to reinstate me, as it were, because there was nothing really standing in my way. The 28th was the day to sit and deal with this matter, and on that day, this thing was abandoned. So there was nothing really standing. The probation termination that she was doing, it didn't even follow process. It broke all the rules of the labor relations, so it was not going to stand. So the only logical thing, I was a DG of Labor, understood these things. So the only thing that was left was just to be put back as to the details of when and how and all of that. I knew that somehow they'll be taken care of.
You indicated earlier in your testimony that you raised the issue of the charges against you with Minister Oliphant. Is that correct?
Just 1 second, Ms. Hofmeyer. Do we know whether somebody is talking to those who must move Mr. Manyi's flight? Is there somebody attending to that?
They are indeed, Chair.
Okay, all right.
Thank you. Mr. Manyi, I understood your evidence to be you did raise the issue of the charges facing you when you interacted with Minister Oliphant. Is that correct?
Yeah, charges, stroke allegations, yes.
But you've just said in your evidence that your understanding was that they'd been abandoned. Why were you raising abandoned charges with the minister then?
No. I had to give the minister the full picture of what was happening. I probably would, I had to give her the full picture of what was happening, and that included that part. That was part of the story. There's no way that you could go and you brief the minister, and then you being drips and drabs of information. You must give the full picture. So I would have said that in that discussion.
Thank you. And we saw the letter between Minister Baloyi and Minister Oliphant indicating that if she were to bring you back and withdraw the termination, she'd then need to make a decision as to whether to continue with the misconduct charges against you. Did you have any discussions with her about that?
Not at all, Chair.
Were you surprised to learn that they weren't proceeded with?
I beg your pardon?
Were you surprised that they weren't proceeded with?
No, I was not surprised because, as I said, I knew they were abandoned on the 28th. That was my understanding, that the lawyers that were tasked to deal with this matter came to a conclusion that no point in carrying this further. Part of the things that I was given last night is the recordal of that meeting. It's here, that it was decided that let's just stop this thing because there's a shortcut that we can take.
Just for the record, Chair, I absolutely accept that the transcript of that meeting indicates that the proceedings were adjourned. It's a separate matter whether the charges were abandoned at that proceeding or not. But I won't debate that further with Mr. Manyi. If we can then, Mr. Manyi, go just to 1 or 2 follow-up questions on your interactions with the former president in relation to your position after the decision of Minister Mdladlana to terminate you. You indicated that you did have an interaction with him. Can you place that in time at all?
I can't place that in time, but it would be in the middle of that precautionary suspension. I really can't place the time.
And this, I assume, would have occurred after the end of October 2010.
I don't recall.
Okay, thank you. How would you describe your relationship with former President Zuma?
Yeah, President Zuma, chairperson, is a very friendly person. Gets along with a lot of people and so on. So I had let me put it this way. President Zuma had a lot of good relationships with a lot of people, and I was one of them.
Thank you. And how would you describe your relationship with the Gupta family prior to your move into GCIS in February 2011?
There was no relationship.
Not at all?
Yeah, look, the relationship chair is a strong term. Whether I knew about them and a relationship with them are two different matters. I knew about them, but a relationship with them at that point, no.
Had you had personal interactions with them prior to that point?
No, I don't recall, Chair.
Do you recall being invited to a New Age friendship celebration in January of 2011?
I saw that in the pack, Chair. That was South Africa. It was a cricket game or something. South Africa and India and all of that. I saw that. Yeah, I remember that. And I was invited there in my capacity as the president of the BMF.
And did you attend?
Yeah, definitely. I attended, Chair.
And why do you say it was in your capacity as president of BMF?
Because in the document, it actually even shows that. I just don't know where to find it. If Ms. Wolfman can just help us.
Yes,
May I
certainly.
beg your pardon, sorry?
It's at page 115 of Exhibit NN5.
115. Yeah. So what's the question again?
You indicated that you were invited in your capacity as president of BMF.
Yes.
And I queried how you came to that conclusion.
If you go to page 122.
Thank you.
There's my name there, and there's President BMF.
This guest list, is this something you'd seen prior to receiving the file last night?
Yes, this is what I got in the file last night.
So you hadn't seen this guest list prior to last night?
This guest list?
Yes.
Unless, I think this is part of those, no, Chair, I haven't seen it. I think, but it's part of those famously known Gupta leaks emails and so on. And I did deal with this matter even initially with Advocate Maleka, so that's why I would remember more or less.
I understand. The invite to you is at page 115. The reason why I queried your understanding that you had been invited in that capacity is the invite doesn't seem to denote that. So I was just wondering, at the time that you were invited, did you understand that you were being invited in that capacity, or did you not understand the capacity in which you were being invited?
No, I knew BMF presidents get invited by all these corporates, Chair. So this was just one of those things. But in fact, when I was looking at this last night, Chair, just to deal with the inference in this whole discussion, it's quite important to note that there are VVIP tables where the Gupta people were and who was in those tables, on those reserved high tables. So I'm not in those tables, Chairperson. There's a whole list of very important people that are in these tables. I was not in those tables. In fact, if you look even in the category here, I was on other emails sent. This is what it's here, Chair. So it was not like I was one of those people that were really targeted. I was just one of the many people that they invited.
Thank you, Mr. Manyi. And I wonder whether you are aware that there was evidence given at the Commission in August of this year by Mr. Simons and Mr. Hlongwane. Are you aware of that evidence?
I saw them on TV here, but I don't know if the details.
I think you might have received a Rule 3.3 notice in relation to Mr. Simons' evidence. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah, yes.
Amongst the things that Mr. Simons testified about was he said that it had been relayed to him by Minister Shabani that he was not keen to appoint you to facilitate the transfer to GCIS. Did Minister Shabani convey that to you ever?
No, never.
Never. Do you have any basis to dispute Mr. Simons' evidence in that regard?
I don't know if he has any evidence to back up what he said in the first place. And I did respond to that invite, that correspondence that I was told I'm implicated. I said, what is implication here? I'm not implicated here. He's just saying things. I think that guy just really wanted to be on TV, to be honest. He just came and he put words in Mr. Chabane's mouth that no one can prove otherwise. So I didn't want to come here and talk about a deceased person and you say he said. That I thought is a waste of time.
Mr. Manyi, you answered my question as to whether you had a basis to dispute what Mr. Simons says Mr. Shabani said to him by saying Mr. Simons didn't have evidence to back it up.
Didn't have evidence, yes.
That's a separate matter. I'm asking whether you have any basis to dispute what Mr. Simons says Mr. Shabani said to him.
No, Chairperson, this is very odd. This is a wrong question. This is a really wrong question. The question here is that Brent Simons comes here and says, Mr. Shabani said 1, 2, 3, 4. I mean, what's that got to do with me, Chair?
Is your answer, I don't know what Mr. Chabane may or may not have said in the conversation with her, if there was such a conversation.
Yes,
and that's all I can say.
Yeah, no, that's and there's no legitimate expectation that I should know. So it's a totally irrelevant and irrational question to ask me, and to say, do I have a basis to say he's wrong, as if I should have the basis to know whatever Mr. Shabane thinks. No, it's an unfair question.
Well, you see, some of these things, these are not legal proceedings like in a court. They're not court proceedings. But to a very large extent, things that happen in a court setup are used. Now, the reason why Ms. Hofmeyer asked that question is because she probably says, look, in case what that witness said becomes important at some stage in the future, we must give Mr. Manyi an opportunity to say whether he has issues with that kind of evidence. Does he dispute it? Now you say, look, I wasn't there. I don't know if that conversation took place, so I really don't know. But what you might be able to say is, for argument's sake, I know that witness. He is an absolute liar. He lies a lot. Whatever he said can't be true. Or I know he has something against me, and that's why he came here and he said that it can't be true. But you might not be able to say anything like that. You might say, I don't know whether what he says was told to him by Mr. Chabane was told to him or not. I wasn't there. and I don't particularly know why he might want to lie about Mr. Chabane if he is lying, but I wasn't there. So sometimes that is what happens. I mean, yesterday, for you, I think you were here, Mr. Maseko was being asked a question about why Mr. Baloyi would tell an untruth and say he consulted with him before he was transferred from GCIS, if actually that didn't happen. And Mr. Masego's answer was, well, you know, maybe speculation might not be a good thing, but maybe he is confusing what was discussed at another meeting in July 2011, or was it 2012, or July 2011, I think, with a meeting that didn't take place. So sometimes a witness can come up with something that might assist to say, okay, maybe that witness is not actually lying, but is confusing certain things. So that's the reason I think why.
Maybe then, Chair, closer to that, I could say, my understanding of the relationship of Minister Chabane and there was his PA, I just forget his name now, he was here. What was this guy's name?
Mr. Hlungwani, who was his private secretary.
What's the first name?
I'd have to get his statement. Just give me a moment. Abednego.
Abednego, yes, sorry. I had a mental block. You see, Chair, if this was said by Abednego, it would carry a lot of weight because of my understanding of the closeness of Abednego with Mr. Chabane. Brett Simons, he had a relationship with Mr. Chabane, but it's not my understanding that it was at that level of having this kind of a discussion. So.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. There was also evidence from Mr. Simons that Minister Shabani had conveyed to him a concern about appointing you because you were embroiled in a scandal at the time. Did Mr. Shabani discuss that with you at all when you met with him?
No, not at all.
And at any point thereafter?
No, never.
Mr. Simons' evidence was also that Minister Shabani said people in communications should not become the news. Did you have a discussion with Mr. Shabani about that at all?
No, that kind of statement was part of the Stratcom line. That's what they've been saying. I mean, when I arrived in the department from day one, that comment was made. So no, Mr. Shabani never said anything like that.
Mr. Manyi, at the end of the expiry of your contract, it was not renewed by Minister Shabani, is that correct?
It was not renewed by Public Service, yes.
Do you dispute that it was for Minister Shabani to determine whether to renew it?
Well, Minister Shabani would have made, look, that contract, Chairperson, did not have an obligation to be renewed. So there was no expectation from my side that it should be renewed. So I don't know if I'm misunderstanding the question. I never expected it to be renewed because that was never the original understanding.
No, I was just, in my answer.
It was a fixed contract.
In your answer, you said it wasn't renewed by DPSA, and that was in response to a question about Minister Shabani having decided not to renew you. So I was seeking to clarify whether you take issue with the notion that it was Mr. Shabani who had to take the decision.
Mr. Shabani would have to make a recommendation to the President. He would not have been able to do that on his own.
The evidence of Mr. Simons was that the President was not happy when Minister Shabani communicated that to him. Do you have any knowledge of that?
I have no knowledge of that, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Manyi, I'd then like to conclude on this aspect of your evidence, if I may. Do you accept that, I think it's been borne out by your testimony today, that it is the President who must decide whether to transfer Director Generals.
Correct, Chair.
And I'd like to put to you what my observations are insofar as the facts between the 25th of January 2011 and the 2nd of February 2011 are, to give you an opportunity to comment to the extent that you wish to do so, or have any knowledge of the facts on the basis of which you may dispute them. There's evidence from Mr. Maseko, Mr. Simons, and Mr. Hlongwane that Minister Shabani was instructed by former President Zuma to remove Mr. Maseko from GCIS. Do you have any basis to refute that?
I'm sorry, just repeat the question.
Indeed. I indicated that there was evidence from Mr. Maseko, Mr. Simons, and Mr. Hlongwane that Minister Shabani had been instructed by former President Zuma to remove Mr. Maseko from GCIS. And my question to Mr. Manyi was, does he have any information that would show that that evidence is not correct?
I'm not sure why he would need to indicate whether he accepts it or doesn't accept that evidence as correct.
Chair, just to be clear about what I was searching for in the question, it was whether he had any information that he could share with us to indicate that it was incorrect. It's along the lines of the questions previously.
Maybe the way to put it would be whether, Mr. Manyi, whether you have any knowledge as to who initiated Mr. Masego's transfer. Do you have any knowledge of that?
No. Direct answer, no, Chair.
Okay, all right.
Thank you. In relation to your move into GCIS,
Sorry, Chair.
Yes.
Can I just make sure that that no is not the no to the question that she was asking, because the question she was asking...
saying no to the question I'm asking.
No to the question you're asking, yes. Yeah.
Mr. Manyi, in order for you to be transferred into GCIS, the decision of Minister Mdladlana to dismiss you had to be reversed. Do you accept that?
Hang on, just before that, I've been given a note to the fact that your flight, Mr. Manyi, has been booked for 4 o'clock. So that arrangement seems to have succeeded.
Chair, there's something wrong with the chair's mic.
Oh, it is on. Is it better now?
Yeah, that's better, yes.
Okay, I was saying that I've been given a note confirming that your flight has been booked for 4 o'clock.
Oh, thank you, Chair.
Yes, okay. Thank you. Would you like to repeat that question, Ms. Hofmeyer?
Yes. In order for Mr. Manyi to be transferred to GCIS, a decision had to be taken to reverse Minister Mdladlana's decision to dismiss you. Do you accept that?
I accept that I had to be brought back from precautionary suspension, Chair.
Do you accept that you were very actively engaged to be brought back from a position where you were not employed by the department?
I accept that I wanted my precautionary suspension to be lifted, and I was talking to everybody I could speak to.
Do you accept that until 2 days before the transfer took place, you were not in the employ of the public service?
I don't have any evidence of that, Chair.
So the fact that a decision on termination needed to be withdrawn on the 31st of January does not constitute that evidence?
The 31st decision by Minister Oliphant, which happened, and I didn't have the details of the dates and all of that as to when she would have written a letter in the first place, maybe to Minister Balo and all of that. I didn't have those details with me. But all I knew is that following my discussion with Minister Chaban, I needed to be, well, in the first place, Chair, my understanding, to be honest, was that if you are on precautionary suspension, you are still in the system, and that's why you get paid.
You are still employed.
You are still employed.
Yes.
Yeah, that was my real understanding. And I keep saying that I have evidence because I was getting the salary. So I have tangible evidence to back up my contention. So when the transfer happened, I just, it was a no-brainer.
Maybe I should put this question. In order for you to be brought back to the department, because I think that's the terminology you used, you said when you, I think, had a meeting with Minister Oliphant at the Sheraton Hotel, you wanted to be brought back to the department. Am I correct so far?
Yes, correct, Chair.
Yes. The withdrawal of this decision that had been taken by Minister Mdladlana, did you think it might be something to be done in order for you to be brought back?
Yes, Chair. I thought the precautionary suspension had to be lifted.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, there's the precautionary suspension,
Yes.
and the decision to put you on precautionary suspension was taken months ahead of the end of October 2010.
Yes, Chair.
Yeah. And the decision by Minister Mdladlana not to confirm your appointment or to dismiss you, whatever the terminology is that one uses, seems to have happened around about the end of October 2010.
Yes, Chair.
So, so there was that decision that you knew that Minister Mdladlana had taken. You didn't think he had power to make such a decision, but he had taken it. So the question that I'm asking was whether, in order for you to be brought back to the department, you accepted that that decision, maybe let's say the decision that you might not have recognized, that decision might have to be withdrawn anyway. Is that something that, is that one of the things that you thought maybe needed to be done in order for you to be brought back?
Yeah, yes, Chair. And I understood the lasting decision, a legitimate decision. I understood it to be the precautionary suspension one. And so to remedy that, somebody must undo that.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Manyi, a great deal happened in those days between the 25th of January and the 2nd of February. I wonder if you have any insight for the Commission as to why so much had to happen in that urgent space of time. Can you shed any light on that?
No, I have no idea, Chair. I was just happy it happened from my side. And I really feel sorry as to the circumstances that Mr. Maseko found himself in. But
So when Minister Chabane spoke to you about two options in regard to transfer, you were in your mind on precautionary suspension, is that right?
yes, Chair.
Do you know what his understanding was? Do you know whether he understood you to be in the department actively working as DG, or did he understand that you were on some suspension or special leave, or whether he understood that a decision had been made to fire you? Do you know what his own understanding was as he spoke to you?
As he spoke to me, he spoke to me as somebody who is in the system.
Okay.
He spoke to me as somebody who is in the system.
Yes.
So I don't. If I was dismissed in the true sense of the word, that discussion would not have happened. So in my view, He spoke to me with understanding that it's one of those fallouts and somebody's on suspension, but still employed.
Do you know whether he did have an understanding that you and Mr. Mdladlana had a fallout?
It was public, Chair.
Yeah.
I'm sure everyone must have known that. Yeah.
But in the discussion between the two of you,
it was not an issue.
Did not arise.
It was not an issue at all.
Thank you.
Mr. Manyi, I'm struggling a little bit with your sense that Minister Shabani would have known nothing about your dismissal. And let me explain why. Your interactions with Minister Baloyi since that letter of the 29th of October referred repeatedly to your dismissal, your efforts to try and get it reversed. They also referred, we saw the letter between Minister Baloyi and Minister Olifant, recognizing that that decision would have to be withdrawn by her. And that's the backdrop to at least some evidence that we've received from Mr. Baloyi that he had interacted with Minister Shabani about the prospect of moves. Is it conceivable that Mr. Baloyi wouldn't have communicated that to Minister Shabani?
Yeah, we're going to go back to tailspin, Chair. I think there's a colloquial understanding of dismissal. I've said this before. That was the going term. But all those that understand the law properly knew that that could not happen without the president. So it was just some unlawful issue that was on the table that could be resolved, and so on. And indeed, they resolved the unlawfulness to restore things to normality.
Mr. Manyi, I would then like to just get your comment. There are numerous documents in the file that you will have looked at overnight, indicating steps taken within the Department of Labour to give effect to your termination. Are you aware of those documents?
Yeah, I saw them last night.
It went as far as to confirm that you had no books outstanding in the library. Did you see that document?
Yeah, I saw that, Chair.
So were there interactions between you and the department about these matters?
No, I don't remember any.
Mr. Manyi, let's then move, if we may, to the evidence of Ms. Williams, Chair, unless there are aspects from you on this.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Thank you. Mr. Manyi, you've given a very, very detailed affidavit in response to Ms. Williams. You criticize her on, I think it's in excess of 10 times, as having lied to the Commission, and you recommend that charges of perjury be brought. Is that a fair summary?
Yes.
So I understand your affidavit to take lying to this Commission very seriously.
Yes.
I would like to start with an aspect of the evidence of Ms. Williams that relates to...
Ms. Hofmeyer, to which bundle should we move now?
Right. So what you have is, you have already NN2, which is Mr. Manyi's response to Ms. Williams, but what I also have available for you is Ms. Williams's own affidavit. And so if I could beg leave to hand that up, that is NN6.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Manyi has a copy already. Chair, you may recall from the evidence of Ms. Williams that, well, it was the evidence of Ms. Williams and then the evidence of Mr. Manyi on the last occasion. You had requested that there be further information obtained by the Commission to give an indication of the comparative spend between various newspapers at the pertinent time. The reason why was there was some information that Mr. Manyi had provided to the Commission, but it became unclear as to the amounts that were being paid to news houses as a conglomerate, as distinct from the various newspapers themselves. So that was one thing you requested. It was the GCIS spend, and that's an aspect that Ms. Williams takes up in her affidavit. On the last occasion that Mr. Manyi gave evidence, he was also asked about his support for the New Age. And he gave evidence there, and you repeated it in your affidavit in response to Ms. Williams's affidavit. If I could take you there, it's in NN2 at page 21. Mr. Manyi, if you'll just read what you say in your affidavit at paragraph 63 on page 21.
Okay, the thrust of my argument for the New Age was value for money based on content dissemination and their anti-hostile yet balanced posture towards government.
And then further down on that page at paragraph 65, sort of two-thirds into that paragraph, you record there, for GCIS, communication is service delivery. If government messages are not reaching communities, then GCIS is not doing its job. That's your evidence, is that correct?
That's correct, Chair.
In your evidence on the 26th of November last year, you gave an explanation about why target markets are important. Do you recall that?
Yes, Chair.
As I have that evidence, you said that, it was quite an interesting way to put it, you said departments do not advertise because they're bored. You said they advertise because they want to communicate a particular message to certain people, to say we want this message to go to this target market. Do you recall that evidence?
I recall that.
Just for the record, Chair, it's at page 129 of the transcript of the 26th of November. Mr. Manyi, with that backdrop in place, I want to make sure that you and I are on the same page about one or two aspects. Circulation of newspapers is different to their readership. Do we agree on that?
Yeah, sure.
And the Audit Bureau of Circulation, colloquially referred to as ABC, deals with circulation, correct?
That's correct, Chair.
And that is distinct from readership, which I want to come to in a moment. I want to just indicate to you that in the evidence of last week before the Commission, there was an affidavit entered from ABC, which indicated that TNA was never a member of ABC nor accredited. Does that accord with your knowledge?
Correct.
And as I understood your previous evidence, TNA had relied on its own auditors to provide circulation numbers. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And did you rely on those figures when you gave support to placing advertisements in the TNA?
Okay, Chair, let me put it this way. The day-to-day operations, that's why part of the recommendations I had made to this commission is that they should invite the guy who was doing the actual job, who is Donald Dipuku. That's the media buyer. He's the guy that makes this kind of a call and does that. Here, I'm talking as the head of department, supporting what my people are doing, as it were. That's what I was doing. So whatever they were doing, the nitty-gritty of those things is done at a different level. But the overall, I support what they were doing. But there was not a day where I went to sign that this must go left, this must go right. Not a day that I did that. But I knew that it was done at a different level and was supportive of whatever was happening there.
Would it cause you concern if you understood that that media buying department within GCIS was relying on non-accredited circulation figures from a publication?
No, I wouldn't be concerned, Chair, because I understand the industry. I wouldn't be concerned at all, because firstly, you need to what people need to understand that this ABC is something run by, call it a media cartel, so to speak. In South Africa, there's only the big four in media. So these are the people that do this. And this thing, actually, Chair, has got serious implications for those that want to get into the media space. Because what happens, Chair, they sit there, the big four, your TSO Black Star, with a new name now, and your Caxton, and your Naspers, and there's the independent group as well. So it's four of these groups. They basically run the show. Everybody, so what they do with these audited figures of theirs, that figure becomes something that a media buying house uses to decide where to place ads and so on. And depending on what comes out of there, also talks to the price, the rate card that they charge for that particular advert. So what this thing does is that if you're a new player coming in, you don't have enough of the circulation to be able to be a member of this elite group. And now you've got media buyers that are sitting and all they want to deal with is the elite. And yet we've got a government position that wants to broaden. And I've made this point before, that government is so serious about helping media that government even have a media development agency, MDDA, that is meant to encourage all of those people that are in the MDDA chair are not members of ABC, but we advertise with them. So if the team I used to lead wanted to advertise to people that are not in ABC, I would encourage that, because that would grow many voices. One message, many voices used to be the motto. So I would not have a problem with that at all.
Mr. Manyi, my understanding of the process with ABC is that you become a member, you hand over your information about circulation, it's interrogated by ABC, and then you get a certificate of circulation. Is your understanding the same as mine?
Yeah, that's correct.
Why could there possibly be a problem for a new entrant to become a member, hand over its circulation figures, have them audited by the accredited body, and then get a certificate confirming their circulation?
It's an election that you make to be part of that group, Chairperson. It's an election that you make. So if you decide that you will have your figures audited differently, there is no law that says you must use ABC. It's such a democratic right not to use them. There's no law.
No, indeed. It is the recognized industry body, though, is it not?
Like many are. I mean, even auditors are recognized.
So did you ever make any inquiries as to the information from TNA's auditors that were being supplied to GCIS?
Yeah, see, this is another operational issue, Chair, that somebody at that level, they would deal with those nitty-gritties, but I would know that as they do these things, they do those checks. So that's done at a different level. I didn't do that personally because it was a delegated authority. So somebody DDG level or chief director level would be doing that.
If you were to be told that no attempt had been made to obtain those audited figures prior to placing of advertisements by GCIS in TNA, would that cause you concern?
Not to even check the audited figures? Yes. Yeah, that would cause concern, yes.
Okay, let's move to the audited figures when they might have been available. Is it not the role of an independent body like ABC to be able to interrogate whatever the auditors are handing over as alleged sales numbers? Is that not a role that an independent accreditation body plays?
They do that for their members, Chair. They don't do that for everybody on the street.
But unless you're going to an independent body to get that certificate, then when you decide to place spend with TNA, all you'd be relying on is the sales numbers that come out of the audited financial statements of that business. Is that correct?
No. What the auditors audit is the print run, which is the same as like circulation. So that's what they would audit. So if somebody, if a registered auditor said they sign off on these are the numbers, those are the numbers.
Are you aware that freebies, newspapers that are handed out for free, shouldn't be counted in the circulation numbers?
Yes, I'm aware because there's a price issue. And you see, I'm glad to raise this, Ms. Hofmeyer, because this is part of the business models that are in place. Now you find that an organization, let's say like TNA, has got that understood that they must assist government as a partner to spread the word about government work. Some of their copies would be sold, some will be sold on subscription, and some will be sold on the corner. And actually, when you say freebies, I'm not even aware that we're giving freebies. But they would make sure that there's as widest a circulation as possible. Yeah, in fact, they would actually even leave them at the airport, some of them, and all of that. Yeah, so there was but their aim was to make sure that the message goes out there.
Mr. Manyi, there's been quite extensive evidence before this commission that TNA, I've used a colloquialism, freebies, but that they were making available to state-owned entities and departments numerous free copies of the TNA. Were you not aware of that?
I understood those to be subscriptions, Chair, not freebies.
No, the evidence is that they were for free.
No, you see, one of the reasons, Chair, when I took over that killed TNA is because the big subscriber, Free State and others, stopped subscribing. So that stopped the money flow. So that was one of the killer punches, as it were. So your understanding and mine are not the same.
Right. If you were to be told that, as a matter of fact, the TNA was distributing for free numerous of their newspapers, would you then accept that relying on audited figures that have their base only in a print run would not be accurate?
No, that doesn't make sense, what you're saying. If, Chairperson, I have printed 100 copies, whether I've sold them or I've given them away, I've printed 100 copies. So what difference does it make whether I've sold them or I've given them away? I have printed 100 copies.
Mr. Manyi, it matters because of an answer you gave earlier. You accepted earlier that circulation should not include newspapers that are given for free. Do you remember giving that answer?
That's how circulation, yes, I gave that answer. That's how they measure circulation. But here we're talking about the print run. I was answering a different question now, that what is the veracity of circulation of somebody that gives things away, things for free? Now my answer is that, and to complete that, therefore what is the reliability of audited versus ABC? So the answer to that is simply that if you have printed 100 copies, you can give all 100 copies away. If they don't stop circulating in the community because you gave them for free. So the fact that the other system requires people to pay is neither here nor there.
But isn't the position about circulation, isn't the significance of circulation numbers this, that whoever wants to know what a newspaper's circulation is, wants to know how much on demand that newspaper is to the public, and that if people spend money to buy it, they must be attaching a certain value to the newspaper that they're prepared to spend money, and that the difficulty if one simply takes the number of newspapers that have been printed is that that might not reflect its true demand if actually it's not that people buy X number of newspapers, copies per day or per whatever from the newspaper, but it's just given for free. Isn't that the significance?
Yeah.
Or do I misunderstand something?
Yeah, let me explain this, Chair.
Yes.
You see, this whole debate is not a mechanical debate, because if the Chair's theory was correct, then everybody would be advertising in the Daily Sun. The Daily Sun is the biggest newspaper in town. It's the biggest, there's nobody as we speak that competes with the Daily Sun in terms of circulation.
I didn't know, that's quite interesting.
Yes, it's the Daily Sun, but it's not everybody that advertises in the Daily Sun, despite that it is the biggest newspaper. And the reason is because of the profile of the people that are interested in the Daily Sun, are not necessarily the profile of the people who would want to go and explain a particular column on a case law story and so on. They are not the type of people that would do that. So therefore, the issue...
Like a business day kind of...
Like a business day, yes, yes.
Or the Star.
That's right, Chair. Because there's two elements to this. There's numbers and there's a target market. So there's psychographics as part of this thing. So people that use these numbers blindly miss that thing. In my last testimony, I used the word spillage, for instance, that you can go and put very valuable information, but it will land in hands that are never ever going to use it because it's not in their interest. So when you do advertising with a particular newspaper, you must know who are the type of people that read that particular newspaper. That's your target market. So that's the essence of this thing. And with the new age, the issue as well, Chair, is that when I was there, the issue was I had a particular interest. My interest was government interest. My interest was to disseminate government information. Now, then there's a posture by the ABC crowd. The posture by the ABC crowd is that if you want to communicate anything, take an advert and so on. We're not going to communicate it for you. So I used to complain that I would go and read a press statement of 10 pages, and then the next day I buy all these newspapers to see how much of that was covered. I'd be lucky to get one sentence. And the beauty of the new age was that they understood that they need to disseminate this information. So therefore, it's something that you would embrace, that here is a newspaper that is willing to fulfill the service delivery of GCIS, which is dissemination of information. When others, when they come to you with an agenda. They come to you ready with their own questions. Doesn't matter what you say. They just tolerate you, read your 10 pages, and they come and ask you about something that happened last week or some other scandal or whatever. And they report about how you responded to that or whatever. So that's what they're interested in. This is what happens in the media space. So when I say the editorial approach of TNA was in line with what government really is yearning for, I still say that even today. I think government misses TNA even today.
Mr. Manyi, thank you, Chair. The Chair's question related to circulation, and you'll recall when we began this discussion, I confirmed with you that circulation is different to readership. Do you recall that?
I make that same point in my submission.
Yes. So your answer to the Chair at the moment has moved into readership, which I absolutely accept is entirely, it's critical to know what the readership of a newspaper is in order to establish that you're getting to the target market you want. So take that as given. But I'd like to focus on circulation, because the question at the moment is, was it reasonable to place advertisements in the TNA where they had no accredited circulation figures, and the only offering for circulation that they gave, if they did give it to GCIS, was the information from auditors based on print runs? And that, as I understand it, was where the Chair's question came from, because print runs are not going to give you an indication of the level of demand for a newspaper if there's a substantial portion of those newspapers that are being dropped at departments and SOEs for free. Let me just, before I ask the question, give you the background. We've had evidence before last week from Mr. Pretorius in which he said the challenge when they're being dropped off at departments and state-owned entities is you actually don't know if people are picking up the newspaper to read it because they haven't had a cash transaction indicating their interest in it. He said they could be picking it up to go and take it home to wrap their moving goods in. So my question to you, Mr. Manyi, is would it be of concern to you if GCIS was making decisions to place advertisements with TNA in a situation where the only information they had about TNA's circulation was based purely on print run figures?
No, I would not have a problem for reasons explained.
And those reasons relate to readership, is that correct?
It would relate to readership, yes.
Great. Let's go to readership, because I put it to you, Mr. Manyi, readership is a separate issue from circulation.
I know. But Themba also measures the readership.
Indeed. So let's go to what was known at the time that you took over at GCIS about the readership of TNA. And we can find that in Ms. Williams's affidavit. It's an annexure there. And that, Chair, is in the bundle that has been marked NN6. For convenience, Chair, I submit that it be entered into the record as Exhibit NN6.
The liver arch file that contains Miss Miriam Pumla Williams' affidavit dated...
Page?
If you'll just wait for the Chair.
Dated, do you have the date, Ms. Hoffman?
I should, Chair, if you'll give me one moment. I think it was 22nd of February. Let me just check. I recall that because Mr. Manyi made reference to it.
Dated 22nd February 2019 is to be marked Exhibit NN6. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. And then if we can go to page 316 of that Exhibit NN6.
I see there are black and red numbers more or less at the same place. Do we stick to the red numbers, page numbers?
Chair, I don't have a version with red numbers, so I'm going to have to ask my... Oh, they're the same. They're the same. So 316, you can use either, Chair.
It does look like it's the same number.
Yes.
316, you said.
316, indeed. Mr. Manyi, as I understand Ms. Williams's affidavit, this is a summary that has been put together of the readership of the top 10 newspapers and then the TNA. over the periods 2010, 2011, 2012, and 2013. Do you understand this document in the same way as I do?
Yeah, sure.
And what is indicated there, insofar as the New Age newspaper is concerned, which is in the bottom line of the table before that square box. In 2010, it indicates that it was not included for measurement. It seems to me that may have to do with the fact that its first newspaper was only printed on the 6th of December 2010. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
So what we have in 2011 readership for New Age is an indication that it's not in the top 10. The top 10 are those that precede it, as I understand this page. And then there's a 39,000 indicated there with an asterisk. And if you go to the asterisk explanation at the bottom of the page, it says unstable, and 2 asterisks means highly unstable. And then the comment there is, less than 40 respondents claim to have read the paper, treated with caution for decision making. Do you see that?
Yes.
So if you had been making the decisions in GCIS whether to place advertisements in the New Age in 2011, would it have caused you concern that those compiling these readership statistics indicated that they were unstable for TNA, that less than 40 respondents had claimed to read the newspaper, and that it should be treated with caution for decision making?
No, I would not be concerned, Chair, because it's a new newspaper. I think it started in 2010. This is comparing apples to pears. So if you understand how business develops, you would know that the first 3 years are the most difficult years. But if we were to take a view that all those that are in the development phase must not be supported, then they will never have competition in this country. This is why I've got all these monopolies. It's because this is this kind of attitude towards new entrants, as it were. To go further, Chair, just to talk to the issue of target marketing. Government has got 34 departments, more or less, at a high level, at national level. If I was an advertiser and I knew that there is a government magazine that all the DGs read, it's only 34 DGs. If I knew that this public sector, they've got a magazine they call Public Sector. If I knew that there is a public sector magazine that every DG has got on their table, they read this magazine, it might have a circulation of 1,000, this public sector magazine. You might have another big magazine on the other side, call it Coffee Ace or you call it. It has got a print run, circulation, whatever, of 100,000. But it's going to be read by housewives, etc., people that are at a particular space. Here I'm a businessman, and I'm interested in the attention of the DGs. Here is a newspaper that is, or a magazine that is read by 1,000 people, but within those 1,000 people, 34 of them are the people that I'm really targeting. Where do you think I'm going to go? I'm not going to go to this big circulation of housewives magazine. I'm going to go to this one. So this is the understanding that must be brought on board about niche newspapers, about target marketing. That when you advertise, when you have a relationship with a newspaper, you have it with them because they can reach the target market that you are looking for. So, yeah. So this not top 10 does not surprise me because we're dealing with old hands in the business. These are new entrants. You can't expect a new entrant to ratchet up to a serious number on the first 3 years. So this was just to be expected.
Mr. Manyi, I accept that in the first...
And to be supported.
Yes. Mr. Manyi, I'd like to separate two things in your answer. You've given an answer that says new entrants need to be supported.
Correct.
That's one matter. The separate matter is, when government spends public money to advertise in newspapers, whether it's going to reach its target market. Do you accept that those are two different things?
Can you rephrase that or repeat that?
Yes, sure. There might be two reasons why government spends public money on advertising. The first might be exclusively to support new entrants, no matter who's reading the newspaper, but to give them a foot up. Do you accept that?
Yes.
There's another reason why government might spend public funds on newspapers, and that is because they want to reach a particular target market. Do you accept that?
Yes, I do.
Let's focus on the latter, if we may, because your consistent evidence before this commission is that reaching your target market is a critical component of a decision to spend on advertising. Is that correct?
Yes.
If you are dealing, admittedly, with a newspaper not in the top 10, but a newspaper who the source of information on its readership indicates less than 40 respondents have read and that it should be treated with caution for decision making, how can you have any confidence as to the target market you want to reach?
No, you see, Chair, it depends. The industry is monopolized. This industry is monopolized. So if you've got the owners of the industry that are making all kinds of comments that undermine new players, you expect that, and you have to work within that. But the nub of the answer is that if we had a situation, Chairperson, where the spend on this particular newspaper was so out of proportion with the others, then we can have a discussion. And I have figures here that would show you, Chairperson. In fact, I submitted this in my last submission, but I've got them here, just to show that, in fact, the government did not stop working with these monopolies, did not stop working with NASPERS, working with all of them, did not stop. So we're not having a discussion here about a government that decided at some point to stop doing business with everybody else but focus on this one. They were getting, in context, it's probably about 4% or so, not more than 4% of the total spend of everything. So we can burn energy, but we're burning energy on 4% unless the argument is that spend zero and so on. So,
Mr. Manyi, I'd like to focus on the 4% and the rationality of government departments, including GCIS, placing advertisements in a newspaper that has less than 40 respondents reading it, and in respect of which there's a caution for decision making. Is it your evidence that it's rational to place an advertisement and spend public funds in the TNA if that is what you know about its readership?
I don't know the reliability of these notes here. I don't know the reliability on these notes here.
Do you have a basis to dispute them?
That's your favorite question.
Or maybe if you don't know the reliability of those notes, Mr. Manyi, maybe you could deal with the question on assuming that they are reliable, what would be your attitude if they were to be reliable, or if they were reliable at the time?
Okay, here, Chairperson, we're dealing with a comparison of veteran newspapers. We're comparing them to a new entrant. The new entrant is launched in 2010, December 2010. So we can even discount 2010. But already, I think this comparison itself is malicious. Or in 2010, this newspaper, the amount of time they had was probably a couple of weeks before end of the year. It launched on somewhere in December 2010, this newspaper. So then 2011, 2012 are the teething years for this newspaper. So anything that would be written that is not complimentary is to be expected. But if you are going to take that to heart, then, Chairperson, you will never have new entrants. So these kinds of comments, you can expect them from new entrants. If this was the case to an established newspaper that has been there for years and so on, I would then get very worried. But if it's said to a new entrant, I'll say, okay, you're not telling me anything that I didn't expect. So I note and we proceed.
Mr. Manyi, do you then accept that your decision to place advertising spend with that newspaper is to support a new entrant and isn't linked to getting your message to a desired target market?
No, it's both. It's both, because to get to the target market, we have an entrant that has got an appropriate strategy for that target market. The fact that the rest of the cartel has got a different view is noted.
Mr. Manyi, you keep giving an answer that indicates a comparison with what you've described as the cartel or the monopoly. I preface my questions with I'm not, for present purposes, interested in the 96%. I'm interested in the rationality of the spend of the 4%. I don't want to take this point further. I put it to you that it is irrational for government in the form of GCIS to spend money on the TNA if it has less than 40 respondents reading the newspaper and there's a caution for decision making. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I disagree with you. I think your summary is devoid of the developmental agenda of government. Your summary is devoid of the experience of the new entrants in terms of barriers into the industry. So that kind of posture is the kind of posture that is causing huge inequalities in this country, because everyone wants you on day one to be a 100-meter sprinter. Nobody wants to invest in you and grow with you. Yeah, so what would be useful by those that were doing this is to go to the first 10 years, first 3 years of these publications and compare them with this publication. That would have been a useful comparison. This comparison given here is a totally useless comparison, because you are taking veteran newspapers, you are comparing them with a newspaper. This comparison on its own is totally irrational and devoid of any logic.
Mr. Manyi, I'd then like to move to the question of spend of TNA. And Chair and Mr. Manyi, you'll pick up the information that was supplied by Ms. Williams and GCIS's records at page 353 in that same exhibit NN6.
353.
Indeed.
Okay. Yes, I see we are at 1:30. How are we doing?
I'm optimistic that we
Yes.
will finish in time for
Yes.
our suggested 2 o'clock end.
Yes. I think I will need that we take a short break. Earlier on, Mr. Manyi, when your flight was at an earlier time, you said you could make it if you left at 12:30, which seemed to give me the impression that's 1.5 hours before departure. If we go beyond 2 o'clock because of the break that I'm proposing, you would still be more or less okay.
We should be more or less okay, Chair. Yes, Chair.
Okay. Could we therefore take just a 15 minutes break and come back at 1:45? If we do that, I think we would aim to finish, or at least not later than 2:15. Would that more or less be fine with you, Ms. Hoffman?
That seems fine to me.
That's
Yes.
fine with me, Chair.
Okay, all right. No, thank
We're
you.
grateful for the break, Chair. Thank you.
Yeah, let's take the break now. So it's 1:30. We'll resume at 1:45. We adjourn.
All rise.
Page 353. Chair and Mr. Manyi, this is part of the information that was produced pursuant to your request, Chair, that there be a breakdown per newspaper of the spend of GCIS over the period. And Mr. Manyi, I accept that the period spans time greater than the time that you were in GCIS, and so I'd like to focus on the 2 years in which you were there. That would cover, on my understanding, both the 2011-2012 year as well as the 2012-2013 year, because you exited GCIS after the end of the financial year in 2012. Is that right? Yes. Oh, if you'll just put on your microphone.
I beg your pardon. Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. So if we start at page...
So 11, 12, 12, 13.
Correct. Those are the 2 years we'll focus on. And if we start with 2011 to 2012, it's at page 353. You'll see right at the bottom of the page there, the indicated spend on the new age. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
And that is in the order of 6.3 million, correct?
Yes.
And then what you get to compare that to, because now I am interested in the comparison, is the spend on other newspapers. So amongst them, you'll see in the third line down is the Sunday Times, and the Sunday Times received spend from GCIS in that period of 8.4 million or thereabouts. Do you see that?
On the same 353 Sunday Times?
Yes, so if you look down on Avusa, it's the third line in that top block, and you go across.
Okay, right at the top, yes.
We've got Sunday Times at 8.4 million, correct?
Yes, correct.
That is, as I cast my eye down this table, the highest spend in that year. Is that also your understanding of the page?
Yeah, in this page as reflected here, that's correct.
And the next highest is the New Age, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And the Daily Sun, which you indicated earlier has the greatest circulation in the country, you'll see towards the bottom of the last block, second line from the bottom there, it says Media 24, Daily Sun was 2.6 million, thereabouts. Do you see that?
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
What I notice about this page is that the spend on the New Age is second only to the Sunday Times. And
please help me. Where is the New Age? I'm trying.
Apology, Chair. It's right at the bottom of the page, outside of a block at all. Do you see right at the bottom of 353?
I am at 353, and
you've got a block for Avusa. You've got a block for independent newspapers. You've got a block for Media 24, and then below the block for Media 24, the last line on the page reads The New Age, 6.3 million.
At page 353.
Yes, Chair, you may be in the wrong file.
I've taken off my specs, but...
No, are you in exhibit NN6?
You see, the last... Oh, outside, so I'm looking inside.
Yes, indeed. I do apologize. It's odd that you've got 3 blocks and then something located beyond them.
Okay, now I see it. Okay.
I think the reason for that is that there were no other publications in the New Age, whereas the others have to be divided insofar as Avusa is concerned between the Herald, Avusa Media, Sunday Times, etc. And what I was saying to Mr. Manyi is that the highest spend on this page is 8.4 million, and that's to the Sunday Times. Daily Sun receives in the order of 2.6 million, but the New Age receives 6.3 million, which is the second highest spend in that year. Do you read the table in the same way as I do, Mr. Manyi?
Yes, it's correct.
Now, that seems to me to raise a question. Why would the New Age, in its first year, given the challenges that we've traversed in the evidence already about its circulation and the concerns raised by the persons who did research on readership, still command the second highest spend within GCIS?
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'm happy that you picked up Sunday Times, which in fact is a good example of how people distort comparisons. Sunday Times is a once in 7 days newspaper. New Age is a 5-day newspaper. So why on earth would anyone compare what you spend on a once in 7 days with a 5-day newspaper? The comparison is absurd, totally absurd.
Thank you. Please identify another 5-day newspaper on this page. Is Daily Sun not a 5-day newspaper?
But I thought we've discussed the Daily Sun.
No,
it is, but the same criticism can be made across many people that Daily Sun does not attract as much advertising spend as others because everybody understands the issue that I spoke about, that target marketing.
But you had no idea of the target market of the New Age.
No, when I say target market, I'm talking, I don't know what we say, I don't know, I have no idea, I don't understand the question. Maybe repeat, what are you saying?
I was referring to the evidence earlier. There was no information before GCIS, based on what we've seen in these papers, that gave it any confirmed indication of a readership beyond 40 respondents. Do you accept that?
No, I don't accept that because, as I said earlier, that I don't know who put that together, what is the veracity of what they put here together.
Right, so let's, as the chair suggested earlier, let's assume that these facts are accurate.
Let's assume that these facts are wrong.
Well, I can't have a debate with you, Mr. Manyi, and yet I have alternative facts on which to base the questions.
Maybe let's put it this way. If these facts were correct, would it affect your answer in any way, or whatever the facts are around that, it wouldn't affect your answer and your approach or attitude towards supporting the New Age?
Can she repeat the question then, Chair?
Okay, maybe okay. Can you repeat it, Ms. Hoffmeyer?
Yes, I'm happy to, Chair. I was just worried that it was your question at this point. But
yeah, using my formulation, maybe.
But let me do so. Mr. Manyi, we have to take the debate on the basis of the facts that are here. So if it is accepted for the purposes of the question that the TNA had only 40 respondents identified in the year of 2011 that had read the newspaper, that target market is extremely small, is it not?
Based on those circulation figures, yes.
Thank you. Those are readership figures, just for the record. Then we move to your evidence a moment ago. You first disputed the comparison I drew between the Sunday Times and the New Age on the basis that the Sunday Times circulate once a week and the New Age circulates 5 times a week, which I understand. That's why I moved the question to, well, let's find another 5-day circulating newspaper. I identified the Daily Sun.
Can I?
Yes, yes, Mr. Manyi.
Can I make this point? Let's compare the Daily Sun with an unparalleled circulation with the Sowetan. And in this table here, the Sowetan in 2011-12, according to this table, got 4 million rand. And if we go to that page, so that we just stick with the facts, we don't have alternative facts, the page that we pointed to initially with that circulation numbers or readership numbers, Chair.
Ms.
if you-
Hofmeyr will be trying to help you with.
Yes, can she
what
please
you're-
help us with
It's
that?
page
so that-
316.
Okay.
Now, Chairperson, look at this. You can take any column. Let's take the first column. Daily Sun has got 5 million in terms of the circulation figure. And Sowetan has got only 1.5. But here, in these figures here, Sowetan with 1.5.
You are now going back to 353.
Oh, sorry, yes.
Yes.
Yes. Sowetan with, in fact, just so that we can compare like with like, let's go to 2012, Chair, on the readership of 2012, on that 316, so that we,
Yes.
yeah. Now you've got Daily Sun at 5.5 million, 5.5 million readership. And then you've got Sowetan at 1.6 million. But on the Daily Sun, how much did we spend? On the Daily Sun, we've spent
2.6 million.
2.6, yet it's a 5 million. So what is the rationale? Why is, just compare veteran to veteran. Why spend 2.6 million on a 5.6 million circulation and spend almost double the amount on something that is 1.5? And I can give you the answer.
My mind is still stuck on the point that you and Ms. Hofmeyr were dealing with much earlier, and it may be that the point that you are raising is another point. You raised the criticism that you can't compare a 5-day newspaper with a 1-day-a-week newspaper, which
Yes.
I understand. Then she said, let's look at another 5-day newspaper.
Yes.
Now, I was waiting that we go there and compare and then see what emerges. But you have drawn my attention to, I think, the Sowetan.
Yes, the Sowetan versus
and
the
what
Daily
I
Sun.
believe to be a 1-day-a-week newspaper, or am I wrong? The other newspaper?
No, the Daily Sun is every day.
Or the Daily Sun is.
It's the same as Sowetan. 5.
The other one that has got a lot of, that you were saying earlier on, is a lot of.
It's Daily Sun, Chair. The one that is topping everyone.
Oh, I thought it was a Sunday paper.
No,
Or
it's a Daily Sun.
Okay, all right. Okay, just repeat the point you are making, because
Okay, the point
when
I'm
you
making,
were making
Chair.
the point, I thought it's
Yeah.
a Sunday, one day a week paper.
Yeah. The point I'm making, Chair, and I'm choosing a sample that is not affected, so that we can point out that you can't operate mechanically on a straight line, like we are made to do in this session. So I'm pointing out here, Chair, that I note that the New Age there's more spent on a New Age compared to any other, so to speak, 5-day. But I'm saying, I can say the same thing about the comparison of Sowetan and Daily Sun, which are both 5-day newspapers, and the comparison in terms of readership between Daily Sun and Sowetan is chalk and cheese. Daily Sun is sitting at 5.5 million readership, and yet we're spending on it only 2.6 million. Yet on the Sowetan, that has got 1.5, we're spending 4.1 million on it, which is almost double the other number. So the point is, you must also have a problem with that if you're going to have a problem with this. So all I'm asking for, let's be consistent when you do these numbers. Let's not cherry pick, because the issue here is that this issue, Chair, is not a mechanical issue. There are just too many nuances in between as to why you would do business with a particular publication.
Yes, no, I think the point you are making has been understood, Ms. Hofmeyr.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Manyi, I do want to make the comparison between the New Age and any other 5-day newspaper on this page, because I would like your evidence on that aspect. So if we go to the page you've drawn our attention to, which is 316, which sets out the comparative readership during the period, my question is the following. What basis could justify spending 6.3 million rand on, let's take your 2012 figures, a newspaper with 107,000 indicated readership, where the next closest spend of a 5-day newspaper is less than 6.3 million, it's 4.1 million, and the circulation, the readership there is 5.5 million. Does that not, on its face, seem to you to call for an explanation at least?
Yeah, I can give the explanation. Chair, you see, one of the, just by way of example, just to understand the business models of these different newspapers, New Age, in its approach, would generally have a lot of campaigns that are 2, 3, 4 pages campaigns. They would have very competitive pricing, because they would say to you, I mean, one of the evidence that Ms. Williams has brought to the attention here is in her affidavit. Just to piggyback on that example, just to illustrate the point, where she got a letter from TNA, and TNA was saying they want to do an 8-pager, and so on. So what we have with the creativity of TNA is people that understand how to get a story to be exciting, mixing graphics with text and all of that, and pictures and all of this, so that this thing is readable. So what you then do is, let's say you have a particular briefing by the president or state of the nation, and then they say, okay, let's do an 8-pager, just by way of example. Then the first page will cover maybe the face of the president. Then the next page maybe will cover parliament or whatever else, and as part of the story, so that as you read the story, because people understand the psychology of the reader, that as you read the story, if you've got pictures in between, it makes the story much more easy to consume. So because the New Age had a lot of those types of campaigns, they would be the preferred medium. By the way, Chairperson, let me make this point, that GCIS is not the actual decision maker on these things. The various departments that come to GCIS, you get a DG of that department, which you can't override as GCIS DG, despite the empirics you have, despite the Themba you have. If a DG of a particular department says, I want this campaign run on Sowetan, he's got the final say, because he's the accounting officer for that money in his department. You can advise that don't do this, don't do that, but the final position sits with that passenger. You can't overrule them. One of the powers I had wanted was to be able to overrule them on this matter. So I left the department without having won that battle. But as things stand, let no impression be created that GCIS was making these decisions. GCIS was an enabler. The people that make the decisions where the ads go are the line departments. So if anyone is to blame here, it's not GCIS, it's the line departments. These are the people that own the budget. By the way, GCIS on its own does not even have a media budget in my time, did not have much by way of that. It would be savings here and there that would do something, but it did not have a substantial millions and millions ready to advertise. No, we're just the enabler department.
Would the line departments send something in writing when they say, please arrange for this to be advertised in a particular newspaper? In other words, could one probably go somewhere and find that this is where you would have all the documentation to say, you know, this is what happened, or was this sometimes just telephonic and verbal,
Yeah.
always verbal or telephonic?
No, Chair, I think it's documented actually. Yeah,
It is documented, yeah.
yeah, it's documented. It's part of what they would
Yes.
require as the
Yes.
people that, because then if you don't do that,
Yes.
then you have a dispute with that particular department
Yeah.
and so on. So you would have to, you can persuade them to do this or that, but they actually have the final say.
Yes.
Yeah, the GCIS does not have the kind of, or let me put it this way, in my time, GCIS did not have the kind of power that National Treasury has. National Treasury is the ruler of government. They decide, they give you a regulation, and that's the line. There was no such in my time at GCIS.
So in effect, what you are saying is, to the extent that it may seem that during a particular time, including your time, there might have been a drastic increase or an increase in business being given to the new age, you are saying those would not have been your decisions or the decisions of your department of GCIS people. It would have been decisions of the departments to which those adverts related, and whatever you or anybody in GCIS may have said to say, what about advertising in that newspaper, that would have been advice which would have been rejected if it was not
It's not black and white, Chair.
Sorry?
It's not black and white.
Yes.
So, but I would say roughly 80% of what would happen
Yes.
would be from line departments.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
so the persuasion, the success of the persuasion,
Yes.
I probably had a 20% success rate. Yeah, but mainly,
Yeah.
I mean, there are people that you will not shake
Yeah.
that say this thing must go to the Sunday Times.
Yeah,
There's absolutely nothing you can do. You must
Okay.
just go to the Sunday Times.
Okay, thank you.
Chair, I'm very conscious of the time. We may need
yes, yes.
to go to past if we can. That still leaves an hour and a half. So I'm optimistic, Mr. Manyi.
Let's confirm that would still be fine, Mr. Manyi, if we go up to past.
1:30, yes, fine.
Yeah, okay.
I'd like to try and wrap this up quickly. Your understanding of the decision-making in GCIS is slightly different to my understanding. Certainly GCIS is procuring for departments, I accept that. But as I understand it, often what happens is the brief comes to GCIS, and the brief is we have a particular communication strategy, we want to get it to this target market. GCIS, please use all of your expertise to assess the market, look at readership, look at circulation, etc., and make a proposal back to us as to who we use. Have I understood it incorrectly?
Yes, you've understood incorrectly. What typically happens, Chair, people approach anybody, they can approach a GCIS, but then it depends, because it depends what campaign you want to run. The most campaigns that would generally be funded from GCIS would be the presidency campaign. There'll be maybe a very small budget around that, because it's the only line department, so to speak, for GCIS at the time. But if somebody else comes to GCIS and they say they've got this brilliant way of advertising energy, for argument's sake, I can tell you this now, Chair, there is no way that GCIS will spend 1 cent on that campaign. They would direct that person to the energy department, and then they'll have that discussion. Then they will look to shape a campaign between that department and that particular newspaper. Then when it comes to GCIS would assess if the chosen medium by that department is correct or not correct, depending on what are the target market requirements and all of that. Then GCIS would say to the department, I know that you want A, but actually for your target market it's B. But the GCIS hasn't got a final say on that matter.
So is it your evidence that we must regard all GCIS spend as not having involved a decision of GCIS, but the decision of the line department?
I did say, Chair, it's not black and white. As I did make an estimate of 80-20. What I'm saying is that 80% of what you see here is the wish of the departments.
So
Well, I'm sorry. If your statement that the people who have the final decision are the line departments, then I'm not sure whether you should be making the distinction you make about 80% and 20%, because it would mean that what you regard as 20% is where GCIS makes suggestions or gives advice to line departments. And if line departments are not bound by that, they would still be making the decision that the advert should go to a patrol newspaper. Of course, one can always say, in regard to a certain percentage, maybe the choice of the newspaper was influenced by GCIS, but maybe in the end, it's the departments which decide whether to accept the advice or not.
Yeah, there are two things, Chair. One, GCIS is the point of interface. So GCIS is the one that would interface with the various publications on behalf of government as a whole, so to speak. So at one point, when various departments come to GCIS, they come with their own proposals, and so on, to say, actually, I want this in the Sowetan, I want this in this particular newspaper. You can persuade. So I'm trying to understand what you mean by decision, Chair, because it's just the mechanism of placing a paper. It might be done by GCIS. That's just a mechanism. But the executive decision on which newspaper is with the line department if you have not persuaded them otherwise.
Yes, but precisely the last point you make is the point that I was trying to find out whether that's not the position. Because if you say government line departments have got a final decision, but you say GCIS has the opportunity to advise and persuade, okay? But they can advise, they can persuade. If the line departments don't accept the advice or are not persuaded, the decision still lies with them.
Yes.
You know, but I think maybe it's fair, maybe I shouldn't have been kind of critical of the distinction you are making, because maybe what you are seeking to do is to make sure that nobody understands that you are saying GCIS had no influence in the choice of newspapers in terms of where the adverts would be placed. But what you are saying is they had some influence, but the final decision makers were the line departments. And maybe what you are seeking to say is, if you were to give a percentage of what that influence was like, you would say more or less 20% of the choice of newspapers for adverts. That's where GCIS influence was.
Yes, that's correct,
Is that
Chair.
correct? Yeah.
Yes, Chair. And in addition, Chair, in addition, nothing stopped a department from going directly and not even coming to GCIS. So we had not, at 2011, 2012, when I was there, we had not come to a regulatory framework that would compel everybody to come via GCIS. So some of these figures are GCIS figures, but it would be interesting to say, can we look at the line departments by themselves? Because they do have a direct line. And when they've done that, they've still not necessarily not broken any law. they've just didn't act with their required understanding, but there's no particular regulation that they've broken. So line departments do make their own arrangements in parallel.
Okay.
Mr. Manyi, I don't think it's profitable to get into a debate about our understanding. My understanding was based on the evidence of Ms. Williams, who indicated that process as I've described it to you in the evidence, which you say is not the process. I'd like, for the purposes of today's evidence, simply to ask you then, to the extent that GCIS was ever involved in the decision-making to place advertising spend with TNA, would it be cause for concern for you to learn that the decisions in the relevant period that you were there resulted in greater spend with TNA than any other comparative 5-day newspaper?
In order to be a matter that one must look at closely to what are the reasons for that.
Thank you. Let's move then to one or two aspects of your response to Ms. Williams, and I will endeavour to be brief here, Chair, but there are a few points I wanted to pick up. A large portion of your affidavit in response to Ms. Williams criticised...
We can put away the other bundle that we have been using.
Yes, so, Chair, I'm hoping in the interest of time not to have to go actually into the affidavits.
Yes, okay.
If there's an issue, we'll do so.
Yes, okay.
Certainly, I have the references, but if we can do it
Yes.
initially at the level of Mr. Manyi's recollection of her affidavit and
Yes.
what he said.
Okay.
You criticize what you describe as an unlawful trial phase that was operating under Ms. Williams's watch at GCIS.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Correct.
And you highlight the fact that in the National Treasury report on the Light Views contract, amongst others, that it had found that there was no request for a dispensation for this in-house media buying not to follow a competitive process. Do you
Yes,
recall
correct.
highlighting that?
Yes.
My question to you is whether you accept that that unlawful trial phase persisted while you were the accounting officer of GCIS.
20% of the time. Chair, the trial phase started in 2010 in September, and it was apparently a 6 months thing. So 80% of this trial phase happened not in my era. And all these shenanigans, payments and stuff, happened in that period. In my era, it was just the tail end of things that happened, but the bulk of the breaking down of all the split invoices, all the irregular things that happened largely in January 2011 before I arrived. Yeah. So the trial phase, I got 20% of it. It was 6 months, and so if you count from September, I probably got the tail end of the 2 months. The bulk of it happened before my time.
Mr. Manyi, we do need to distinguish two things. I understand the procurement that occurred in January of 2011, before you arrived there, that was the subject matter of the National Treasury report. I absolutely accept that those payment decisions, the authorizations occurred before you got there, so take that as given. What I am asking about is your criticism of Ms. Williams and the fact that there was an unlawful trial phase that did not receive National Treasury approval to move media buying in-house into GCIS. You criticize her repeatedly for having an operation in place which allowed in-house media buying to take place without National Treasury approval. And my question to you is it not the case that that very situation persisted, not for 2 months, but for the entire time that you were DG of GCIS?
Chairperson, I think if you go to the relevant paragraphs of Ms. Williams, part of the nub of the issue here is where money got lost, in my view, by GCIS, where she was signing this commitment of payments and so on, which were irregular and all of that, the splitting of invoices, that happened. So the loss that had happened here, which is the real reason for this report, is that main 7 million that went missing because of this, not went missing, was paid irregularly, and so on. That is the thing. When I came to the picture, we didn't have this commitment to pay happening again, because then it got stopped as soon as we saw this. It didn't happen again.
Mr. Manyi, that is not an answer to my question. I'll ask it again. By the time you left GCIS, had you received National Treasury dispensation for in-house media buying within GCIS?
It's something I'll have to check, Chair.
You can do so at least on the basis of a letter that you wrote shortly before you left GCIS. It is one of the attachments to Ms. Williams's affidavit. You'll find it in NN6 at page 46. Again, if you need to go there, you can, but I can tell you it's a letter that you signed on the 28th of May, 2012. Just remind us, when did you leave GCIS?
Yeah, I think, Chair, let's just set the context that that memo that you're talking about was a complete overhaul of how things should work to make sure that media buying gets the maximum. That was a Rolls-Royce request that one had put there. That does not necessarily mean in between that there were no other legitimate ways of doing things. I just don't have the detail, because as I say, this was happening. A person that really should be asked, and I'll say this again, should be asked to come and talk to this at a operational level is Donald Dipuku. I think this commission would be a serious injustice if they don't ask him to come here. Can explain this at a level of details as to what was happening at that point in there, but I just know that there was some way in which this was done in a manner that would not disadvantage the taxpayer, but the detail I don't have.
What was the name again of the person?
Donald Dipuku, but Dipuku is spelled L-I.
L-I, I remember.
Yes, Dipuku. Yeah. That person, Chair, he was heading media buying. Well, so most of this detail here, his
name is
Donald.
Would appear in a list of names that I've previously said, of people that I've said should be called or should be interviewed quite some time back. I'm sure he's going to be interviewed. If he hasn't already been interviewed, then would be called.
He's the same guy, Chair. I know we're running out of time, and I don't want to disrupt Ms. Hofmeyer's input here. He's the same guy, Chair, on NN2. On NN2 that has submitted an affidavit, page 97.
Yes, but that's fine. Let's not spend more time.
Okay.
He is one of people that I had identified many months ago as people who should be interviewed and possibly be called. So there are many who haven't been called who should be called and will be called. So I'm sure he will be called at some stage.
Okay.
Ms. Hofmeyer, your time is limited, so both Mr. Manyi and I are trying to give you time to continue.
Chair, we really only have about 2 minutes left.
5 on my watch.
5. Oh, that's better than mine.
Manyi, on your 5 on his watch. So 5 at least. Let's see.
Mr. Manyi, to close off on this point, just for the purposes of the record, the letter that I drew your attention to, I read that letter to be a request for the very dispensation that you criticize Ms. Williams for not having obtained for the in-house media buying. Do you dispute that?
Yes and no. I dispute. It's this is a thing of these yes and no answers, Chairperson. The issue is that that dispensation, if it was in place, wouldn't be having this problem. But the fact that that dispensation was not yet in place did not mean we did the irregularities that Ms. Williams and her team committed. Splitting invoices, there's a whole list of things that they have done, which even without a regulation, you should not be doing. So most of what was done was really the illegal stuff, that you did not need any regulation, you did not need any dispensation, beg your pardon. You don't need a dispensation to say, don't split invoices. There's a treasury regulation already on that. Don't do that. But they were doing it, and in fact, they were saying, this is how GCIS does its business. One of the recommendations I had said here in my submission is that what this commission should do is to investigate the splitting of invoicing by GCIS before, because this one of these people interviewed here was saying, no one, somebody I think at a director level, was saying it was never brought in as an irregularity for me, but this is generally how we do things here. You know, so that we don't need a dispensation for, and this was my center of the criticism. A lot of the things that were done that were just not following any prescript, that do not require a particular dispensation.
Mr. Manyi, do you accept that there was an extensive investigation conducted on this matter by National Treasury?
On which matter?
The matter that you've just referred to, the 7 million rand, the splitting of invoices, light views.
Chairperson, there are two issues which we must not confuse. The one issue is centralization of the media bulk buying. The issue at hand here, we're not dealing with the issue at hand here was a particular service provider who himself is not a media house. As it were, the name is there. They themselves are not a media house. And the irregular appointment of that service provider, that service provider would still have gone to go and get media somewhere. He was himself not a service provider. So we must not confuse issues. The National Treasury investigation was not about media bulk buying. It was about the irregular appointment of that particular service provider and the rest of what happened as a result of that irregular appointment. So my criticism was around the appointment of that service provider and the irregularities that flew from that. The media buying issue is not even affected by these things. A separate matter of trying to consolidate the resources is a positive process of making sure that we get economies of scale. But there's nothing in media buying that requires the shortcuts that the people are doing and cost payment commitments, splitting of invoices and all of that. So let's not confuse issues.
Mr. Manyi, it may be late in the day, but we are completely at cross purposes. I was moving to the very thing that you say this commission must investigate. You say this commission must investigate this irregular expenditure that occurred prior to you joining GCIS. Is that correct?
No, I said they must investigate. That's too broad a term. I was very specific and narrow. The splitting of invoices.
Thank you. Mr. Manyi, is that a matter that was investigated extensively by the National Treasury?
That was one of the things.
Yes.
It's not specifically that
No,
one.
but the one that you say you're interested in, the splitting of the invoices, that, amongst other things, was fully investigated by the National Treasury. Is that correct?
That was an incident investigation. Yes, Chair. There was an incident that said that, and my request was to do a much broader investigation. That was just an incident of one company or two companies that were involved in this. So that's what was the issue. It's not only the splitting of invoices that was investigated, it was also the irregular appointment and the raft of other things.
Are you aware that the matter relating to the specific splitting of invoices on the Stats SA contract for Census 2011 became the subject matter of court proceedings?
Yes, I'm aware.
And that the claim made by the service provider to GCIS, Lightviews, was dismissed?
Yes.
You're aware of that?
Yes.
Thank you. One of the last points that I want to deal with, and Chair, my suggestion is if they follow on matters, particularly given that we're going to be delving into the salary issue, we may initially engage on affidavit with Mr. Manyi about that and then take it forward. But I would just like on the question of disciplining of staff. Mr. Manyi, Ms. Williams says in her affidavit that there was this extensive investigation. There were disciplinary processes that followed it within GCIS, and at no point in the disciplining process was she ever disciplined. Do you accept that?
This is the dispute of the issue, Chair. The issue was that the people that were prima facie fingered were the junior staff. So the DDGs were the people that did the investigations to their junior staff, and a lot happened there. Nothing happened to any of the DDGs, including Ms. Williams. That is the factual position.
Did you hold the view at the time that Ms. Williams should be disciplined?
I did not hold any view against anybody. I wanted an investigation. So the first phase in my mind was to start at the lower levels where a lot of action is happening. The senior staff, they are a bit more sophisticated. So I was hoping that the National Treasury report, because it was going to do that, because what they did, they went through everybody, including DDGs. They took laptops and all of this. They did the investigation, National Treasury, including everyone. I did not do anything, basically, personally, not on anyone, not even on junior staff. Junior staff was processed by their line managers at a particular level.
Do you accept that it's your responsibility as the accounting officer of GCIS to have ensured that any persons who engaged in irregular expenditure should have been disciplined?
Yes, correct.
So I have your evidence to be at the time that you were at GCIS, you did not form the view that Ms. Williams had engaged in irregular expenditure.
I did not have evidence, Chair, and I was not going to accuse her. But I was hoping that because we've got a Treasury report, that she's also part of it, I'll be informed by the outcome of that report. Unfortunately, when it came out, I was already gone.
Thank you, Chair. I suggest we take up the remaining points in an exchange with Mr. Manyi on affidavit.
Yes, no, that's fine. So that means, Mr. Manyi, you may be requested to deal with certain questions by way of affidavit, but for now, we will stop here because we also don't want you to miss your flight. But thank you very much for taking part and for giving your evidence. So I will then now adjourn the proceedings, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. But as I go, Chair,
Yes.
for the record, noting that the Chair is adjourned, but for the record, when I said, and this is my parting shot, where I say Ms. Williams lies. She lies because she says my investigation basically absolved her. I have no findings on her. And the fact of the matter is that I never investigated her. So I can't have findings without having investigated you. That's the one point. The second point, she says the National Treasury report did not have any findings against her. I want to close by saying the commission should look at the Treasury report on clause 8.1.1.8 and clause 8.1.2.11. Those clauses are very specific that she did not have a delegated authority to make the commitments to those commitment of pay notices. It is written there. So as in the list of findings. So you can't then say there are no findings against you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I think, Mr. Manyi, I must excuse you because you might have to run. So you are excused. Yes. Ms. Hofmeyer, you probably need to say something about Ms. Oliphant because we spoke yesterday on the basis that she would appear today.
Yes.
And the public may be wondering. Yes, do you
Indeed,
want to
Chair.
place something on record?
Indeed. Just to clarify, when I referred yesterday to the fact that she would be giving evidence, and I think I indicated today, that was based on an assumption that I held at the time, that the necessary arrangements had been made with Ms. Oliphant for her to appear today. At the conclusion of yesterday's hearing, I was informed that that had not in fact taken place. There have been regular engagements or attempts at engaging with Ms. Oliphant. The last of those, I understand, have not been responded to by Ms. Oliphant, and that is why we find ourselves in the position where I had assumed there had been contact. As a matter of fact, I understand that despite repeated attempts to make contact with her, there has not been contact. The consequence of that is that she's not here today to give evidence, but certainly my proposal is that steps be taken to ensure that she does give evidence on the important matters we've been addressing yesterday and today.
No, that's fine. So the matter must receive further consideration, all obviously also taking into account yesterday's evidence and today's evidence insofar as it may be relevant.
Indeed, Chair.
We are going to adjourn. At this stage, we certainly are not sitting tomorrow, and at this stage, we are not sitting next week because next week was set aside for the further appearance of the former president, who will not be appearing for reasons that have been given publicly. But should there be some days next week that will be used for the hearing, the public will be informed. We adjourn.
All rise.